Declaro abierta la sesión número 3059 del Consejo de Seguridad. Dado que la presente es la primera sesión que celebra este mes el Consejo de Seguridad, desearía aprovechar la oportunidad para rendir homenaje en nombre del Consejo al excelentísimo señor Thomas Pickering, representante permanente de los Estados Unidos de América, por los servicios prestados como presidente del Consejo de Seguridad durante el mes de febrero. Sé bien que hablo en nombre de todos los miembros del Consejo al expresar mi profundo reconocimiento al señor Pickering por la gran habilidad diplomática, eficiencia e impecable cortesía con la que guió la labor del Consejo durante un mes sumamente productivo e importante. Desearía en nombre del Consejo también dar la bienvenida al señor Vladimir Petrovsky, secretario general adjunto de Asuntos Políticos, y desearle el mayor de los éxitos en la importante función que acaba de asumir. Tenemos gran interés en colaborar con él en la labor del Consejo. También desearía aprovechar para expresar en nombre del Consejo nuestro agradecimiento al señor Vasily Safronchuk, anterior secretario general adjunto de Asuntos Políticos del Consejo de Seguridad, por la colaboración prestada al Consejo a lo largo de estos años. Le deseamos al señor Safronchuk un gran éxito en sus actividades futuras. El orden del día provisional correspondiente a la presente sesión figura en el documento S/Agenda/3059. De no haber objeción.
Unless I hear any objection, I shall consider the agenda adopted. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with the understanding reached in the Council's prior consultations, I invite the delegations of Iraq and Kuwait to participate in the consideration of the item on the Council's agenda in accordance with Article 31 of the Charter of the United Nations and Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure. Accordingly, I invite the representative of Iraq to take a seat at the Council table.
Invito al representante.
I invite the representative of Kuwait to take the seat reserved for him at the side of the Council chamber.
Según el entendimiento que se llegó en la...
In accordance with the understanding reached in the Council's prior consultations, I extend invitations under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure to Mr. Hans Blix, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and His Excellency Mr. Rolf Ekeus, Executive Chairman of the Special Commission. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. The Security Council is meeting in accordance with the decision taken at its 3058th meeting on 28 February 1992, as indicated in the statement by the President of the Security Council of the same date, document S/23663, and as agreed in the Council's prior consultations. On behalf of the Council, I welcome the distinguished Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, a member country of the United Nations, His Excellency, Dr. Tariq Aziz, whose presence here today is undoubtedly significant. We collectively aspire to very productive and constructive meetings. It will be recalled that on 14 February 1992, the President of the Council informed the Council about the interest of the government of Iraq in sending a high-level technical team to respond to any questions that the members of the Council might put to it on all aspects of Iraq's compliance with Resolution 687 of 1991 and other relevant resolutions. Following consultations among members of the Security Council, I have been authorized to make the following statement on behalf of the Council. First, general obligation. The resolutions concerning the situation between Iraq and Kuwait impose a number of general and specific obligations upon Iraq. As regards the general obligation, Iraq is required, under paragraph 33 of Security Council Resolution 687/1991, to give official notification to the Secretary General and to the Security Council of its acceptance of the provisions of that entire resolution. Iraq signified its unconditional acceptance in letters dated 6 and 10 April 1991. S/22456 and S/22480 respectively, and 23 January 1992, S/23472. When the Security Council met at the level of heads of state and government on 31 January 1992, the concluding statement made by the President of the Council on behalf of its members, S/23500, contained the following passage. Last year, under the authority of the United Nations, the international community succeeded in enabling Kuwait to regain its sovereignty and territorial integrity, which it had lost as a result of Iraqi aggression. The resolutions adopted by the Security Council remain essential to the restoration of peace and stability in the region and must be fully implemented. At the same time, the members of the Council are concerned by the humanitarian situation of the innocent civilian population of Iraq. On 5 February 1992, the President of the Security Council issued a statement on behalf of its members, S/23517, in which he stated, among other things, in connection with the Secretary General's factual report, S/23514, on Iraq's compliance with all the obligations placed upon it by Resolution 687 of 1991 and subsequent relevant resolutions, the members of the Security Council note that while much progress has been made, much remains to be done. The members of the Council are disturbed by the lack of Iraqi cooperation. Iraq must implement fully Resolution 687 of 1991 and subsequent relevant resolutions, as was stated in the statement read out by the President of the Council on behalf of its members in the meeting held on 31 January 1992 with the participation of the heads of state and government. S/23500. In a statement made on behalf of the Council on 28 February 1992, S/23663, the President said, "The members of the Council demand that Iraq immediately implement all its obligations under Council Resolution 687, 1991, and subsequent resolutions on Iraq. The members of the Council require the government of Iraq to communicate directly to the Council without further delay an authoritative and unconditional acknowledgement of its agreement to accept and implement the above-noted obligations, including specifically to comply with the determination of the Special Commission requiring the destruction of ballistic missile-related equipment. The members of the Council emphasize that Iraq must be aware of the serious consequences of continued material breaches of Resolution 687, 1991. I must also draw attention to the further report of the Secretary General on the status of compliance by Iraq with the obligations placed upon it, S/23687. From the aforementioned statements by the President, and in view of the reports of the Secretary General, it will be seen that despite Iraq's statements of unconditional acceptance of Security Council Resolution 687, 1991, the Security Council has determined that Iraq is not in full compliance with all of its obligations. Specific obligations. In addition to the general obligation to accept the provisions of Resolution 687 of 1991 in their entirety, several Security Council resolutions impose specific obligations upon Iraq. A. Respect for the inviolability of the international boundary. By paragraph 2 of Resolution 687, 1991, the Security Council demands that Iraq respect the inviolability of the international boundary and the allocation of islands previously agreed upon between Iraq and Kuwait. Pursuant to paragraph 3 of that resolution, the Secretary General established a Boundary Demarcation Commission to demarcate the boundary between Iraq and Kuwait. Paragraph 5 of the same resolution requires Iraq and Kuwait to respect a demilitarized zone established by the Security Council. The Council has been informed that Iraq has respected the demilitarized zone and that it has fully participated in the work of the Boundary Demarcation Commission. It has also been informed that Iraq refuses to withdraw a number of police posts that are not in line with UNICOM's principle that both sides should stay 1,000 meters from the boundary line shown on UNICOM's map. Weapons-related obligations. Section C of Resolution 687, 1991 imposes certain specific obligations upon Iraq with respect to its chemical and biological weapons programs, its ballistic missile programs with a range greater than 150 kilometers, and its nuclear programs. These obligations are elaborated upon in Resolutions 707, 1991, and 715, 1991. The obligations are defined in paragraphs 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 of Resolution 687, 1991, and they are elaborated upon in paragraphs 3 and 5 of Resolution 707, 1991, and paragraph 5 of Resolution 715 of 1991. The information relevant to Iraq's compliance with the obligations laid down in the paragraphs of the Security Council resolutions to which I have just referred is reproduced in Annex 1 to the Secretary General's report, S/23687. By Resolution 699, 1991, the Security Council decided that the government of Iraq shall be liable for the full costs of carrying out the tasks authorized by Section C of Resolution 687, 1991. No funds have so far been received from Iraq to meet this liability. The Council has noted that since the adoption of Resolution 687, 1991, progress has been made in the implementation of Section C of that resolution, but that much remains to be done. There is serious non-compliance with the obligations concerning the programs for weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles, and the members of the Council have found this to be a continuing material breach of Resolution 687, 1991. The Special Commission has informed the Council about the outstanding matters that would at the present time appear to be the most important. The Council's attention is invited again to Annex 1 of the Secretary-General's report S/23687 of 7 March 1992. The Council has also noted the statement by the International Atomic Energy Agency contained in the Secretary-General's report of 25 January 1992, S/23514, Section C of the Annex. The attention of the Council is drawn to information annexed to the further report of the Secretary-General, S/23687, Annex 2, of 7 March 1992, relative to the two last inspections by the IAEA on Iraq's compliance with its obligations under United Nations Security Council resolutions as they relate to nuclear activities. In a statement issued on behalf of the members of the Council, S/23609, the President stated on 19 February 1992 that Iraq's failure to acknowledge its obligations under Resolutions 707, 1991, and 715, 1991, its rejection, up until now, of the two plans for ongoing monitoring and verification, and its failure to provide the full, final, and complete disclosure of its weapons capabilities constitute a continuing material breach of the relevant provisions of Resolution 687, 1991. In a further statement made on 28 February 1992 on behalf of the Council, S/23663, the President said, "The members of the Council deplore and condemn the failure of the government of Iraq to provide the Special Commission with full, final, and complete disclosure as required by Resolution 707, 1991, of all aspects of its programs to develop weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles with a range greater than 150 kilometers, including launchers, and of all holdings of such weapons, their components, and production facilities and locations, as well as all other nuclear programs, and the failure of Iraq to comply with the plans for ongoing monitoring and verification approved by Resolution 715 of 1991. Furthermore, the members of the Council equally deplore and condemn Iraq's failure, within the time prescribed by the Special Commission, at the request of Iraq, to commence the destruction of ballistic missile-related equipment designated for destruction by the Special Commission. The members of the Council reaffirm that it is for the Special Commission alone to determine which items must be destroyed under paragraph 9 of Resolution 687, 1991. repatriation of and access to Kuwaiti and third country nationals in Iraq. As regards Kuwaiti and third country nationals in Iraq, Security Council Resolutions 664-1990, 666-1990, 667-1990, 674-1990, 686-1991, and 687 of 1991 impose an obligation on Iraq to release, facilitate repatriation of, and arrange for immediate access to them, as well as the return of the remains of any deceased personnel of the forces of Kuwait and of the member states cooperating with Kuwait pursuant to Resolution 678 of 1990. Furthermore, paragraph 30 of Resolution 687 of 1991 requires Iraq to extend all necessary cooperation to the International Committee of the Red Cross in facilitating the search for Kuwaiti and third country nationals still unaccounted for. The Security Council was informed by the International Committee of the Red Cross in January 1992 that almost 7,000 persons have returned from Iraq to their countries since the beginning of March 1991. The ICRC also stated that despite all its efforts, there are still thousands of persons reported missing by the parties to the conflict. A special commission composed of the representatives of France, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom, and the United States has met under the auspices of the International Committee of the Red Cross to try to reach an agreement on, among other things, the implementation of paragraph 30 of Resolution 687-1991. However, the ICRC has informed the Council that it has not yet received any information as to the whereabouts of the persons reported missing in Iraq. Nor has it received detailed and documented information on the search conducted by the Iraqi authorities. Finally, it is also still awaiting information on persons who have died while in custody. The attention of the Council is drawn to Section 4, paragraphs 12 to 14 of the Secretary General's report contained in document S/23687 of 7 March 1992. Iraq's liability under international law. Another obligation concerns Iraq's liability under international law. In Resolution 674 of 1990, the Security Council reminds Iraq that under international law, it is liable for any loss, damage, or injury arising in regard to Kuwait and third states and their nationals and corporations as a result of the invasion and illegal occupation of Kuwait by Iraq. Its liability under international law is reaffirmed in paragraph 2b of Resolution 686 of 1991 and paragraph 16 of Resolution 687 of 1991. Resolution 687, 1991 further specifies that it is liable under international law for any direct loss, damage, including environmental damage, and the depletion of natural resources, or injury to foreign governments, nationals, and corporations as a result of Iraq's unlawful invasion and occupation of Kuwait. By paragraph 18 of the same resolution, the Security Council created a fund to pay compensation for claims that fall within paragraph 16, to be financed by a percentage of the value of the exports of petroleum and petroleum products from Iraq. In view of the existing economic sanctions against Iraq under Resolution 661 of 1990, Iraq was permitted by the Security Council under Resolutions 706/1991 and 712 of 1991 to sell a limited quantity of oil. A portion of the proceeds from which would be used to provide financial resources for the fund. To date, Iraq has not availed itself of this possibility. The Council notes that this authorization is due to lapse on 18 March 1992. The members of the Council are aware of a request by Iraq for a 5-year moratorium on meeting its financial obligations, including payments into the compensation fund. Repayment and servicing of Iraq's foreign debt. With regard to another obligation, the Security Council in paragraph 17 of Resolution 687/1991 demands that Iraq scrupulously adhere to all of its obligations concerning servicing and repayment of its foreign debt. The attention of the Council is drawn to paragraphs 17 and 18 of the Secretary General's report S/23687 of 7 March 1992. Return of property. I now turn to the question of return of property. The Security Council, in paragraph 2D of Resolution 686/1991, demands that Iraq immediately begin to return all Kuwaiti property seized by it, to be completed in the shortest possible period. The members of the Council have noted with satisfaction that, as stated in the further report of the Secretary General, Iraqi officials involved with the return of property have extended maximum cooperation to the United Nations to facilitate the return. Monthly statements of gold and foreign currency reserves. Another obligation is set out by paragraph 7 of Resolution 706/1991, under which the government of Iraq is required to provide to the Secretary General and appropriate international organizations monthly statements of its gold and foreign currency reserves. To date, no such statements have been provided to the Secretary General or to the International Monetary Fund. Undertaking not to commit or support acts of international terrorism. By paragraph 32 of Resolution 687/1991, Iraq is required not to commit or support acts of international terrorism or allow any organization directed towards commission of such acts to operate within its territory, and to condemn unequivocally and renounce all acts, methods, and practices of terrorism. The Council notes Iraq's statements contained in letters dated 11 June 1991, S/22687 and S/22689, and 23 January 1992, S/23472, that it is a party to international conventions against terrorism and that it has never pursued a policy favorable to international terrorism as defined by international law. Security Council action with respect to the Iraqi civilian population. Resolutions 706/1991 and 712/1991 provide a means for Iraq to meet its obligations to supply its civilian population with needed humanitarian assistance, particularly food and medicine. To date, Iraq has refused to implement these resolutions. In fact, after initiating discussions with Secretariat representatives on implementation, Iraq abruptly terminated the discussions. Security Council Resolution 688 of 1991. I should now like to refer to the demands by the Security Council with respect to the Iraqi civilian population. In paragraph 2 of Resolution 688 of 1991, the Security Council demands that Iraq, as a contribution to removing the threat to international peace and security in the region, end the repression of its civilian population. In paragraphs 3 and 7, the Security Council insists that it allow immediate access by international humanitarian organizations to all those in need of assistance in all parts of Iraq, and demands its cooperation with the Secretary General to these ends. The Security Council remains deeply concerned at the grave human rights abuses that, despite the provisions of Resolution 688, 1991, the government of Iraq continues to perpetrate against its population, in particular in the northern region of Iraq, in southern Shia centers, and in the southern marshes. Commission on Human Rights Resolution 1992/71 of 5 March 1992. The Security Council notes that this situation is confirmed by the report of the Special Rapporteur of the Commission on Human Rights, document E/CN4/1992/31, also to be circulated in document S/23685. and by the comments of the Office of the Executive Delegate of the Secretary General, contained in the further report of the Secretary General. The members of the Council are particularly concerned at the reported restrictions on the supplies of essential commodities, in particular food and fuel, which have been imposed by the government of Iraq on the 3 northern governorates of Dohuk, Erbil, and Suleymania. In this regard, as the Special Rapporteur has noted in his report, inasmuch as the repression of the population continues, the threat to international peace and security in the region mentioned in Resolution 688 of 1991 remains. Concluding observation. In view of the observations on the record of Iraq's performance, the Security Council has considered itself justified in concluding that Iraq has not fully complied with the obligations placed upon it by the Council. It is the Council's hope and expectation that this meeting will prove an invaluable opportunity to advance in the consideration of this issue, as required in the interest of world peace and security, as well as that of the Iraqi people. This concludes the statement by the President of the Council. I shall now give the floor to those members of the Council who have indicated their wish to make statements. The first speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of Austria, Ambassador Hohenfeldner, to whom I now give the floor.
Mr. President, quoting oneself can easily be perceived as odious, but sometimes it can also serve as useful purpose. In my very first intervention in this Council, Mr. President, on 14 February 1991, I underlined the paradigmatic importance of the way we deal and finally resolve this conflict, not only for the future of the region, but also for the concept of collective security and the role of the United Nations as a whole. The decisions taken by this Council almost a year ago, and I'm referring here in particular to Resolution 687, have to be seen in their overall context. On the one hand, the Security Council laid down a number of obligations on Iraq, guided by the need to be assured of Iraq's peaceful intentions in light of its unlawful invasion and occupation of Kuwait, to quote from Resolution 687. Today's meeting and debate are a welcome opportunity to take stock and to provide members of this Council with a basis to evaluate afterwards to what extent our previous decisions were implemented and to what extent we may need to take further action. On the other hand, Mr. President, this is also an opportune time to recall other motives we had in mind a year ago, to remember some of our more far-reaching aspirations and to reflect on how we can develop them further into practice. I shall come back to this point later on. As regards the state of Iraqi compliance with relevant binding decisions of this Council, you, Mr. President, have already given a useful, comprehensive overview. There are, of course, also a number of recent statements by various presidents of the Security Council, as well as instructive reports by the Secretary General, including information provided by the Special Commission and various reports by the IAEA. The picture emerging from all this information is, to say the least, very disturbing indeed. While all obligations placed on Iraq are important, I should like to focus today in particular on two areas. The first, Mr. President, is the humanitarian and human rights situation in Iraq. At the same time, the Iraqi government is protesting against the embargo imposed by the international community. It has blocked the import of food, fuel, and medicines to some areas of the country, in particular those inhabited by Kurds. Repressive measures continue to affect also the southern marshes. The detailed reports by the Special Rapporteur of the Commission on Human Rights contains additional information on massive human rights violations by the Iraqi government that were condemned by the Human Rights Commission in a resolution adopted on 5 March 1992. The comments received from the Office of the Executive Delegate of the Secretary General further document the absence of full Iraqi compliance with Resolution 688. Mr. President, another aspect concerns Resolutions 706 and 712, which gave Iraq the possibility for oil sales to finance, inter alia, the purchase of foodstuffs, medicines, and materials, and supplies for essential civilian needs for the purpose of providing humanitarian relief. It is deplorable that the Iraqi government has not yet used these possibilities to provide its population with access to adequate food and health care. We urge Iraq to resume the talks with the United Nations Secretariat on the implementation of this scheme immediately. Mr. President, the second main area I should like to comment on concerns Iraq's obligation under Section C of Resolution 687 and Resolutions 707 and 715. While there have been signs of better cooperation with some inspections, as referred to in the report of the 10th IAEA inspection, document S/23644, overall Iraqi cooperation and compliance continues to fall short. What is particularly worrying is Iraq's failure to provide all information required under Resolution 687 and 707 and to acknowledge its obligations and provide the declarations required under the plans for ongoing monitoring and verification approved by Resolution 715. Since other speakers today will no doubt focus on this matter, I shall not belabor this point. Suffice it to point out, therefore, that under the relevant resolutions of this Council, continuing material breach of its obligations places Iraq in a situation which may have serious consequences, as emphasized repeatedly in recent statements of presidents of this Council. Mr. President, at the outset, I tried to place this debate into a wider, one may even call it a historical context. What I had in mind was to recall that our decisions last year were seen as part of a broader effort to establish peace and security in the area and indeed the region as a whole. On 3rd April 1991, the day we adopted Resolution 687, I said, and I quote, "This resolution is rightly based on the premise that the relevant actions to be taken by Iraq represent only first steps toward the goal of establishing a zone free from weapons of mass destruction and all missiles for their delivery in the Middle East, and toward the objective of a global ban on chemical weapons. It also highlights the objective of achieving a balanced and comprehensive control of armaments in the region. This will require a responsible approach on the part of the main suppliers of arms and of their buyers alike." End of quote. Almost 1 year later, Mr. President, this objective has not yet been achieved. Indeed, if one believes recent reports, a new arms race in this volatile region is already well underway. Mr. President, the last point I should like to attempt to make today concerns collective security and the role of the United Nations as a whole in dealing with conflicts. There is already a vast body of academic literature on how the United Nations was brought into play in the Gulf conflict, on the role of this Council and the authority its decisions conferred upon those acting on their basis. Whole libraries will no doubt in due course be written on the legal and political implications. Suffice it to say here that in many ways a new beginning had been made. Some important steps had been taken towards establishing a system of collective security. To my mind, this would be the right path to follow also in the future. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante de Austria.
I thank the representative of Austria for his statement. The next speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of the United Kingdom, Sir David Hannay, to whom I give the floor.
Very much, and my congratulations to you on assuming the presidency, and my thanks to your predecessor, Ambassador Pickering, for the work that he did last month. Mr. President, my government welcomes the possibility to hold this discussion and the presence at it of a high-level delegation from Iraq headed by the Deputy Prime Minister. It is essential that the Iraqi leadership should hear directly from the Council the extent and nature of our concern about Iraq's non-compliance with Security Council Resolution 687 and subsequent resolutions, and that they should get a clear, first-hand impression of the Council's determination that its resolutions should be fully implemented. It's important to recall the origins of our discussion this morning and their object. Following the bi-monthly review of sanctions, which was completed on the 5th of February, the Council asked its then President to convey its negative conclusions to the Iraqi government, and it was in response to this that Iraq asked for the opportunity for this debate. Our discussion is therefore about compliance, or rather it's about the lack of compliance. On this, the key text must be the presidential statement endorsed by the Council at its meeting at the level of heads of state and government on the 31st of January. I quote, "Last year, under the authority of the United Nations, the international community succeeded in enabling Kuwait to regain its sovereignty and territorial integrity, which it had lost as a result of Iraqi aggression. The resolutions adopted by the Security Council remain essential to the restoration of peace and stability in the region and must be fully implemented," unquote. The Council has before it the Secretary-General's excellent factual report of the 25th of January and the update on it circulated more recently on the 7th of March. These give a full and detailed picture of the degree of Iraqi non-compliance with this Council's resolutions. It is a somber and disturbing one. The list of instances of non-compliance is long. They need to be remedied urgently if there is to be any hope of restoring peace and stability in the Gulf region. Taking the issues in the order in which they arise under Resolution 687, my government notes the following serious problem areas. First, the demarcation of the boundary between Iraq and Kuwait. The work here is proceeding very slowly and has been the object of much dilatory argument from the Iraqi side. It is essential that this work be brought now to a speedy conclusion and the boundary demarcated so that it should not again become a matter of contention between Iraq and Kuwait. Second, the weapons of mass destruction. This is an area of very great concern where the Iraqi performance has from the very beginning been one of evasion, dissimulation, and often outright dishonesty. In its original disclosures about its weapons of mass destruction, Iraq made a series of statements about its chemical, biological, nuclear, and ballistic missile programs, all of which were demonstrated by subsequent inspections to be materially untrue. Iraq denied that it had a program for the enrichment of uranium. It in fact had three, a flagrant breach of its obligations under its safeguards agreement with the IAEA. Iraq denied that it had a program for nuclear weaponization. It now admits it had one, a clear violation of its obligations as a state party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iraq denied that it had a program on biological weapons. It subsequently admitted that it was conducting biological research for defensive and offensive purposes. Iraq's disclosures on chemical warfare munitions and facilities and on ballistic missiles were substantially understated. Its original declaration of the missile capability did not mention the supergun. The work of the Special Commission and the IAEA has been obstructed in breach of the agreement with the government of Iraq on all the rights and privileges of those bodies as they seek to fulfill their mandate. The recent obstruction encountered over the Special Commission's use of airfields of its choice in Iraq is simply one case in point. This track record can give us no confidence that the full picture has yet been disclosed or that future attempts will not be made to frustrate the Special Commission and the IAEA's work in Iraq. I note that that is also the view of the Director General of the IAEA and of the Chairman of the Special Commission. Despite all the good work done by the Special Commission and the IAEA to bring to light the matters concealed by Iraq, we are now confronted with three serious issues in this sector. First, there is still not a full and complete disclosure of Iraq's programs. Second, Iraq has so far refused to acknowledge its obligations for long-term monitoring. Third, Iraq is resisting the implementation of the Special Commission's determinations on the material and installations that need to be destroyed. I hope very much that as a result of this debate, the Iraqi authorities will understand the absolute need for them to comply promptly on these 3 points. The full, final and complete disclosure of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction capability demanded by the Council is essential to establishing a materials balance and to making any judgment as to whether Iraq has declared all relevant items. Without such disclosure, the Special Commission and IAEA future ongoing monitoring plans cannot proceed as required by the Council. As for the destruction issues, this is a further area in which there is no scope for negotiations. As the Council statement of the 28th of February stated, the determination of which items need to be destroyed under paragraph 9b of Security Council Resolution 687 is for the Special Commission and for the IAEA and for them alone. Nor is it acceptable that the Council should be drawn into a discussion of what it would or would not do if Iraq complied with its obligations. The obligation to comply is an absolute, not a conditional one, and my delegation hopes very much that Iraq will understand that point. Thirdly, there is the question of Kuwaiti property. Despite the fact that nearly a year has gone by, much Kuwaiti property remains to be returned by Iraq. The pace at which the property is being returned is unacceptably slow. Some returned property has been found to have been damaged by the Iraqis. Fourthly, the matter of compensation. Iraq has so far done nothing to finance the compensation fund which has been set up. It has rejected an approach permitting the export of oil under Security Council Resolution 706, which would have provided compensation for the victims of its aggression. Fifth, the matter of Kuwaiti detainees. As we have seen in the report of the International Committee of the Red Cross, there are still many Kuwaitis and others languishing in confinement in Iraq long after they should have been returned to their native country. And sixthly, on the matter of performance bonds, Iraq has not carried out the requirements of paragraph 29 of Security Council Resolution 687. This is a very summary list of the areas in which Iraq is not in compliance with Resolution 687. If one includes the resolutions adopted subsequently to Security Council Resolution 687, there are many other points on which Iraq is not in compliance. It is a signal of the Iraqi government's cynical disregard for the welfare of its own people that it has not cooperated with the implementation of Resolutions 706 and 712. These provide for fair and equitable arrangements for the export of quantities of Iraqi oil to finance the import of food, medicine and other civilian supplies to meet the humanitarian needs in all regions of Iraq and of all categories of the Iraqi civilian population, and to finance the work of the Special Commission and the Compensation Fund. It is therefore the intransigence of the Iraqi government and not the action of the Security Council that is the cause of the suffering of the Iraqi people. Furthermore, Iraq has not provided monthly details of its gold and foreign currency reserves in accordance with paragraph 7 of Resolution 706. In addition to all these points, Iraq has also failed to comply with Security Council Resolution 688, which was adopted in response to a threat to international peace and security arising from the brutal military action which Iraq took against its civilian population in the Kurdish and Shia areas of the country, resulting in a massive flood of refugees across the frontiers of its neighbors. Far from engaging in the dialogue which Security Council Resolution 688 calls for, Iraq has now for several months operated an economic blockade against some of these areas, particularly the Kurdish areas. Until the last few days, it has frustrated the opening of UN humanitarian centers in some of the Shia areas, and it has in many other ways acted in a manner completely inconsistent with Security Council Resolution 688. Mr. President, the list of Iraqi non-compliance is thus a long and sorry one. It also means that the international community has had to meet the costs of international humanitarian assistance for Iraq, and Britain alone has contributed nearly £50 million since April 1991. Finally, I am bound to mention the recent report to the Commission on Human Rights by the Rapporteur on Iraq, Mr. Max van der Stoel. The contents of this report are truly horrifying and reveal very clearly that Iraq is in serious breach of its human rights obligations under the Charter, international human rights covenants, and customary international law as embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Neither the British government nor this Council has ever had a quarrel, nor does it have a quarrel now, with the people of Iraq who have suffered so much from the transgressions and miscalculations of their rulers. We remain committed to doing what we can to alleviate their suffering. To this end, sanctions on foodstuffs were lifted as soon as Kuwait was liberated, and last September, a scheme for providing $1 billion worth of humanitarian supplies to Iraq was adopted by the Security Council. It is a matter of deep regret that Iraq has refused to cooperate in the implementation of that scheme. My delegation will support its renewal when it expires later this month, and hopes that Iraq will come to see that this scheme has no ulterior political purpose, but is purely humanitarian in scope, and its objective is to reduce the suffering of the Iraqi people. I hope there will be a possibility after this formal debate to pose some questions to the Iraqi delegation. I must repeat that it is through full compliance with all relevant Security Council resolutions, and by that route alone, that peace and stability can be brought again to the Gulf region. Mr. President, a year ago, Iraq was expelled from Kuwait by force of arms under the authority of the United Nations. The use of force was required because Iraq miscalculated and believed that this council was bluffing. There was an opportunity then for Iraq to comply, which she failed to take. There is an opportunity again now for Iraq to comply. I hope she will not again miscalculate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante del Reino Unido.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, Ambassador David Haney for his statement and for his kind words addressed to me. The next speaker on my list is the representative of France, Ambassador Jean-Bernard Mérimée, to whom I give the floor.
Mr. President, following the liberation of Kuwait, our Council, through Resolution 687 and those which followed it, imposed on the government of Iraq clear and precise obligations. France, since then, has been dedicated to the integral and rigorous implementation of those resolutions. It has always reaffirmed that once Iraq abides by these resolutions, the regime of sanctions can be lifted. It wishes to reiterate this today in the presence of the high-level Iraqi governmental delegation. The objective of France and that of the Security Council is not to starve the Iraqi civilian population in order to exert pressure on their leaders. Quite the opposite. We have sought for and found those means which make it possible to feed the Iraqi population. France drew up and adopted, together with the members of the Council, Resolutions 706 and 712, which allow Iraq to sell a certain quantity of its oil and to purchase food, products, and medicines. My country deeply deplores the fact that the Iraqi authorities have taken on the very grave responsibility concerning the life of their people by refusing to make use of these texts. It urgently calls on the government of Iraq to make use of these provisions and thus to avoid increased suffering for its citizens, sufferings for it will bear the sole responsibility since it has the means to put an end to them. The objective of France is also not to prevent Iraq from reconstituting or even from increasing its civilian industrial capacity, as Iraq is accusing us of doing. My government, together with the Security Council, is pursuing two objectives: to eliminate the weapons of mass destruction accumulated by Iraq, and also to ensure that Iraqi industrial capacity is not used to reconstitute its military potential once that latter will have been destroyed. These two objectives were laid down in Resolution 687, 707, and 715. Iraq is far from having fully implemented these resolutions. I shall take two examples which we consider as extremely serious. First of all, Iraq has still not fully satisfied, meagerly doled out by Iraq, and which has had to be supplemented for the most part by what the numerous missions sent on site have been able to discover by themselves. This situation cannot go on. It is time for Iraq to submit to us, as it must do, a precise and full picture of its military program. Let us not reverse roles here. It is not up to our Council or to the Special Commission to ask questions of Iraq to which Iraq can choose whether or not to answer. It is up to Iraq, finally, to abide by its obligations by ceasing the concealment of information demanded and by lying to the Special Commission. It would gain by creating within our Council a climate of confidence which at the present time does not exist because of the numerous evasive acts of which we've had proof. The second example, also in the area of the weapons of mass destruction, we deplore the fact that Iraq has still refused to commit itself unconditionally to the application of the two plans for monitoring and continued verification approved by the Security Council in Resolution 715 more than 5 months ago. These plans have binding legal value, and it is unacceptable that Iraq has not still committed itself to their application. Only their implementation will allow Iraq to resume its normal industrial civilian production under effective and objective international control. Mr. President, I shall not dwell in detail on Iraq's numerous failures to fulfill the obligations flowing from the relevant resolutions of our Council. But I should like to note, in the policies and practices of the Iraqi government, other elements which are of great concern. The blockade established by the Iraqi authorities towards Kurdistan is causing an extremely difficult health and humanitarian situation, which risks a new exodus of populations toward neighboring states, similar to that which we unfortunately saw last year. There are consistent reports that the Iraqi government is trying to impose similar measures on certain zones within the south, while it continues to reject the presence of United Nations officials or members of humanitarian organizations in Kirkuk or in the region of the marshes. Our concern over the situation is intensified by news that fighting has resumed in the north and that the Iraqi army is continuing to strengthen its positions near the security zone. This repressive policy, which is depriving large sectors of the Iraqi population of their fundamental rights, is a direct violation of Resolution 688, and my country is most dedicated to its implementation. The highly critical nature of the human rights situation in Iraq, as highlighted very specifically in the report recently drawn up by Mr. van der Stoel, moreover, is a subject of great concern to my government. Mr. President, the balance sheet thus drawn up clearly demonstrates the numerous failures of the government of Iraq to abide by its obligation under the resolutions of the Security Council, and also the continuation, indeed the aggravation of the policies and practices which are a cause of keen concern to the international community. In such a context, characterized by a consistent desire to challenge the authority of our Council, my government today cannot accept a mitigation or lifting of the sanctions. Nor does it accept the theory that if Iraq applies 50%, 70%, or 80%, depending on the case of the resolutions of the Security Council, then the Council must lift equivalent proportions of those sanctions. Indeed, as long as Iraq hides documents and materials, on what basis can we state that, for example, the destruction of ballistic missiles has been carried out 100%? In addition, a resolution is not divisible. It must be applied in full, and not according to the proportions which are to the liking of the Iraqi authorities. I should like to conclude by expressing a wish that the arrival in New York of the delegation headed by Mr. Tariq Aziz will allow the government of Iraq to understand that only a policy of cooperation with the United Nations can meet its national interests and those of its people. This, for the Iraqi authorities, is the path of courage and responsibility, the sole way for it to truly achieve the objective of lifting these sanctions is therefore fully and unconditionally to abide by their obligations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al
I thank the representative of France, Ambassador Jean-Bernard Mérimée, for his statement. The next speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of the United States, Ambassador Thomas Pickering, to whom I give the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me first congratulate you on your assumption of the presidency of the Council, and thank you and others for their kind words addressed to me. Mr. President, during the course of the past year, no subject has preoccupied the Council more than its efforts to restore international peace and security in the Gulf in the aftermath of Iraq's aggression against Kuwait. We are here today because the requirements of the Council have not been met. We are also here because Iraq has asked to send an authoritative senior official to answer all the questions. I can assure him that there continue to be many questions which must be answered. Preeminent among them is why Iraq will not comply fully and completely with the resolutions of this Council. Nearly 1 year ago, on the 3rd of April 1991, the Council adopted Resolution 687. This comprehensive and unprecedented resolution established a detailed framework for restoring and maintaining international peace and security in the Gulf region. Passage of this resolution was one of the most important actions ever taken by this Council, responding to the hope of mankind to make the United Nations an instrument of peace and stability. Resolution 687 required Iraq to take precise steps on many issues. Iraq formally notified the Secretary General and the Security Council by letter on April 4th, 1991, followed by an Iraqi letter of April 11th, 1991 from its National Assembly of its acceptance of the resolution. Thus, a formal ceasefire to the Gulf conflict came into effect on April 11th, 1991. Resolution 687 led to a number of other resolutions to implement its specific parts, including 689, 692, 699, 700, 705, 706, 707, 712, and 715. This is a long list indeed of detailed resolutions spelling out Iraq's obligations. Unfortunately, from the first, Iraq has tried to obfuscate and evade its obligations. The Council agreed in Resolution 687 that if the Gulf region is to enjoy peace and security, Iraq's weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles must be permanently eliminated. This requires Iraq's cooperation, including the full and complete disclosure of its weapons programs. The record of Iraq's failure in this regard is unescapable, clear, and serious. Indeed, an unfortunate pattern has developed. Iraq makes declarations of minimal content, declarations which are clearly meant to misinform, misdirect, and to conceal. Iraq repeatedly divulges information related to its weapons programs only after being presented incontrovertible proof uncovered by the Special Commission and the IAEA in their inspections. This is not compliance, but hide and seek, cat and mouse, cheat and retreat. For example, in the nuclear field, Iraq concealed evidence of its electromagnetic isotope separation program for enriching uranium to the extent of pouring concrete over telltale structures and covering the concrete with rubble. In another instance, Iraq, in its declarations, consistently denied any nuclear weaponization programs until the 6th Nuclear Weapons Inspection Team in September of 1991 found extensive and detailed documentation for such programs. Belatedly, Iraq provided the 7th Weapons Inspection Team formal, but still incomplete, written acknowledgement of its nuclear weapons program. Still yet another damning example was Iraq's denial until August 6, 1991, when inspectors found evidence of it, that Iraq had produced unsafeguarded plutonium. In the area of chemical weapons, Iraq offered contradictory statements regarding the making of chemical munitions. More importantly, Iraq has failed to respond satisfactorily to requests for information on Iraq's past chemical weapons program, particularly as regards foreign suppliers of munitions, equipment, and precursor chemicals. Instead, Iraq has insisted that its chemical weapons production did not start until 1986 and has claimed that all its chemical weapons were produced indigenously. However, the whole world knows, as attested to by the United Nations itself, that Iraq used chemical weapons against Iran as early as 1983. Turning to biological weapons programs, Iraq unquestionably violated its obligations to hand over to the Special Commission all its biological weapons-related items when, contrary to Security Council Resolution 687, it destroyed buildings at its Salman Pak Biological Weapons Research Center immediately prior to the first Commission inspection there. Moreover, after first maintaining it had no biological weapons and that it had carried out no related activities, Iraq then acknowledged to inspectors that it had undertaken research which could have had offensive military applications. Lastly, Although Iraq then claimed that its biological weapons program, which it said had begun in 1986, had ended in 1990, a special commission biological weapons inspection team found clear evidence, again at Salman Pak, of the capability to produce what was characterized by them as, and I quote, vast quantities of biological agents, end quotation. In the area of ballistic missiles, with a range greater than 150 kilometers, Iraq initially declared 62 Scud missiles and Scud variants, and 5 sites for production, maintenance, storage, and deployment. Subsequent inspections revealed, however, that Iraq had misrepresented its inventory of ballistic missiles, components, and facilities, and attempted to deceive inspectors and conceal missiles and related components from inspection teams. As but one in a long list of examples I would give you today, Iraq's original declaration did not include 5 types of ballistic missiles covered by Resolution 687. This pattern of concealment has continued, I am afraid to say, right down to the present day. For this, I draw your attention to the report of the Executive Chairman, Ambassador Akeus, on his special mission to Baghdad, February 21st to 23rd, in which he notes that at the very moment that he was being assured that Iraq had made all the required declarations and fulfilled its obligations, a ballistic missile inspection team found at 2 sites prohibited items that had not been previously declared. Iraq continues to try to deceive and to evade. In those February 1992 discussions with the Special Commission, Iraq stated it had already provided all the necessary information under Resolution 687. Iraq's previous actions to the contrary make it impossible for us to believe now that such is true. The Special Commission Chairman could not but conclude that Iraq has given, and I quote, no undertaking to provide such a full, final, and complete disclosure, end of quotation. Even in the face of its unsatisfactory disclosure of information on its weapons of mass destruction programs, destruction of some of these weapons has proceeded. Without full, final, and complete disclosure, however, the inspectors will never know if all such weapons have been located and destroyed. More precisely, in the absence of full disclosure, we will all have to conclude that the destruction certainly cannot be categorically proven to be complete. United Nations resolutions also call for the destruction, removal, or rendering harmless of Iraq's production facilities for these weapons of mass destruction. The clearest example of Iraq's nuclear facilities is the Al-Athir facility. United Nations inspection teams have found that Al-Athir is in a state-of-the-art facility expressly designed for producing nuclear weapons. Iraq's own progress report on Al-Athir, seized by a United Nations inspection team in September 1991, links Al-Athir directly with Iraq's nuclear weapons program. Al-Athir can in no way be considered to have any purpose other than weapons making, and therefore should be immediately and completely destroyed. Iraq has refused to destroy material in ballistic missile production and repair facilities designated by the Special Commission in February. Iraq has argued that these missile production items can be used for other purposes, including, interestingly enough, the production of military missiles of ranges of less than 150 kilometers. Iraq has claimed that it can render these and similar facilities for producing weapons of mass destruction harmless by converting them to civilian use. Given Iraq's clear record of non-compliance with the United Nations efforts to identify Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, however, Iraq must not be allowed the option to return these facilities to use for production of these awful weapons. Therefore, these facilities should be destroyed rather than merely converted. The critical point here is not whether facilities are capable of producing material for civilian use, but whether they are capable of being used for prohibited purposes. The Council continues to support the proposition that the Special Commission, and not Iraq itself, must and will determine which facilities are required under Security Council resolutions to be destroyed. This is not a matter for negotiations or haggling, but of a final determination by the Special Commission which must be observed by Iraq. Regarding Iraq's obligations under Resolution 705 and 715 to agree unconditionally to implement the ongoing monitoring and verification plans, the Special Commission Chairman has reported in February that Iraq had not provided such an agreement. The Council insists on the necessity of assuring the international community that Iraq will not reacquire these destabilizing weapons. There is no alternative to Iraqi acceptance and implementation of Resolution 707 and 715. Allow me now to turn to Iraq's other obligations under Resolution 687. On border issues in August of 1991, the Iraqi representative to the Boundary Commission stated that Iraq rejected the work of the Commission. Iraq has nevertheless participated reluctantly in the work of the Commission. Iraq is obligated to accept the work of the Commission. Any statements by Iraq to the contrary are breaches of Iraq's obligations under Resolution 687. Also related to the border is the issue of 5 Iraqi border police posts located on the Kuwaiti side of the boundary line on the map used by the United Nations Special Commission for Iraq, which the Special Commission has repeatedly asked Iraq to remove to its side of the border, and indeed 100 meters away from the line on the UNICOM map as previously agreed, but which Iraq still refuses to do. On the return of property, although progress has been made in returning Kuwaiti property, much remains to be done, including the return of aircraft and surface-to-air missile systems taken from Kuwait by Iraq. On the repatriation of Kuwaiti, Saudi, and other third-country nationals, Iraq refuses to take action on investigating lists of missing detainees submitted by Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. At a meeting in Riyadh in November of 1991 of representatives from Iraq, Kuwait, France, Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, all of the parties to that meeting, including Iraq, agreed to grant the International Committee of the Red Cross all facilities necessary to enable the ICRC to gather information on the whereabouts of missing persons. 1 full year later, Iraq has yet to agree to ICRC access to Iraqi prisons and places of detention. Nor has Iraq yet followed through on its agreement to publish in its media lists of missing persons or to report effectively on what tracing steps it is taking on individual inquiry files. Iraq's response has been a series of unfulfilled promises. The latest series of such promises was made in a February 1992 letter to the Secretary General, which declares that Iraq is prepared to talk to the ICRC representative in Baghdad about ICRC access to prisons and publication of names of the missing. To add insult to injury, this Iraqi letter asserts that Iraq is now in compliance with paragraph 30 of Resolution 687 as a result of these promises. Once again, Iraq has deliberately delayed any meaningful cooperation on this issue, displaying a totally callous and uncooperative attitude toward the plight of the missing and the suffering of their relatives. Iraq has repeatedly criticized the Council for causing shortages of food, medicines, and other essential civilian needs in Iraq, even though Resolutions 706 and 712 provide the means for Iraq to assure the provision and equitable distribution of such goods to all the Iraqi civilian population. Paragraph 7 of Resolution 706 also required Iraq to submit monthly statements of its gold and foreign currency holdings. Iraq has yet to submit its first report. Not only has Iraq not taken advantage of the 706-712 mechanism to improve the welfare of the Iraqi population, but Baghdad persists in actions of repression against its civilian population, particularly in the predominantly Kurdish-inhabited areas of the north and in the predominantly Shia-inhabited areas of the south. Grave international concern at Baghdad's brutal repression of its own civilian population led to passage of Resolution 688 on April 5, 1991. This resolution condemned the repression and demanded its immediate end. Members of the Council will recall that indiscriminate Iraqi shelling of civilian populations and other military pressures on civilians had led to a massive exodus from northern Iraq to Turkey and Iran, threatening the international peace and security of the region. Resolution 688 also insisted that Iraq allow immediate access by international humanitarian organizations to all those in need of assistance in all parts of Iraq, and to make available all necessary facilities for their operations. The Commission on Human Rights Special Rapporteur's February 18, 1992 report, the press, and non-governmental organizations have all documented the economic embargo instituted by the government of Iraq in October 1991, and I'm sorry to say still continuing to this day, on shipments of food, fuel, and other essential humanitarian supplies to northern Iraq. This embargo, enforced by the Iraqi military, is both impeding UN relief operations and inflicting severe hardship on Iraqi civilians, as well as impeding their right to enter and leave the area. In addition, Iraqi citizens formerly resident in the Kirkuk area are not allowed to return to their homes and businesses. Elements of the embargo include cutting off salary and pension payments to Iraqi civil servants in the north, curtailing rations to approximately half the level of what other Iraqi civilians receive, and reducing fuel deliveries to approximately 25% of the pre-October 1991 level. Checkpoint guards on the roads leading to northern Iraq are reported to confiscate the smallest quantities of privately purchased food carried by civilians arriving at the checkpoints from the south. It is ironic, truly tragic, that the government of Iraq should continue to issue distorted, fabricated, and exaggerated claims about the alleged humanitarian impact of United Nations sanctions, sanctions which in no way restrict the flow of medicines, food, and other essential humanitarian goods, while the Iraqi government itself imposes an internal embargo consciously designed to deprive some of the selected Iraqi civilians of food, fuel, medicine, and other essential services. The Iraqi government continues to repress its predominantly Shia population in the south as well. As recently as December and January, the Iraqi military launched attacks on the Marsh Arabs, killing hundreds. The United Nations Human Rights Commission Special Rapporteur's report and the press have also documented repressive Iraqi government practices against Shia religious and cultural institutions. The government of Iraq apparently is waging a concerted attack against the Shia clergy by arresting them, by disappearing them, imprisoning them, and torturing them. Iraq has yet to reply to an inquiry from the Special Rapporteur about his November 1991 list of missing persons, including Shia clergy. The Iraqis continue to keep the ill and aged Imam Hui under house arrest and to deny him medical attention from outside specialists. In 1991, the shrine of Imam Hussein in Karbala was shelled, badly damaged, and desecrated. The official Iraqi explanation that Shia rebels defiled their holiest shrine defies credulity. Shia religious colleges and universities have been closed. Shia publications are prohibited or strictly censored. Shia religious leaders are prevented from traveling freely. More generally, Iraq's human rights record is abysmal. The Special Rapporteur's February 1992 report, a document circulated to members of this Council, as well as recent reports by private human rights organizations, catalog a compendium of horrors. Much of the new evidence derives from the files, the videotapes, and the documents of the Iraqi secret police and security forces themselves, who in particular carefully recorded the regime's brutality against the Kurdish people. Thus, the world is learning in detail of Operation Anfal, the forced relocations of thousands of Kurdish villagers in a deliberate Iraqi policy to erase 4,000 Kurdish villages from the face of the earth. Already, the Special Rapporteur has received more than 15,000 names of missing Kurds, which led him to conclude that it would be difficult to dismiss the Kurdish claim of some 182,000 disappeared persons. Grave diggers are giving evidence of the burying indiscriminately of executed persons in mass graves. This list of horrors goes on and on. Iraq's continuing repression of its civilian population led the Special Rapporteur to conclude that the threat to international peace and security in reference to Resolution 688 still continues. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Council has seen Iraqi promises of compliance over the past year. As the President of the Council stated in his opening statement, the Council demands and expects Iraqi actions to comply with its resolutions. Without full and unconditional compliance, the chances of lifting sanctions are nil. The Iraqi delegation now has the opportunity to provide authoritative answers to our questions and authoritative declarations of unconditional acceptance of Resolution 707, 715, and indeed of all of the resolutions. Even more important, Iraq now has the opportunity to show by its actions that it will carry out its obligations. We would welcome authoritative answers, declarations, and even more actions. Once again, the Council stands at a critical juncture in its consideration of restoring and maintaining international peace and security in the Gulf region. My government and the Council will be watching closely Iraqi actions in the future. By disdaining and failing to comply with the Council's resolutions, Iraq risks making, as it has in the past, yet another tragic and fateful miscalculation, the full consequences of which the government of Iraq will once again have to bear. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of the United States, Ambassador Thomas Pickering, for his statement and for his kind words addressed to me. The next speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of the Russian Federation, Ambassador Valentin Lezinsky, to whom I give the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, allow me to welcome you here to the post of President of the Security Council and to express our satisfaction at the way with such skill you have undertaken the guidance of our work here. On behalf of the delegation of the Russian Federation, I should like to ask you to convey your gratitude to the permanent representative of the United States, Ambassador Pickering, for that great diplomatic art, professionalism, and energy with which he so outstandingly guided the work of the Security Council in the month of February. Mr. President, a year has passed since that time when, through the efforts of the international community, on the basis of decisions of the United Nations Security Council, the aggression of Iraq against Kuwait was halted. Aggression which cost the lives of thousands of totally innocent Kuwaitis and citizens of other countries, and which caused enormous material damage. To prevent a reoccurrence of such a criminal venture, the Security Council drew up a system of measures designed to ensure peace and stability in this region. However, as is demonstrated by the facts cited in the introductory statement of the President of the Council and in the statements of the members of the Council, the result of Iraq's refusal fully to abide by its obligations under the resolutions of the Council, an extremely dangerous situation now exists. The events of the last year demonstrate that the Iraqi leadership until now has not yet begun to cooperate with the Council and to implement all of its decisions. Moreover, recently, Iraq has been making efforts to review the implementation of those obligations which it earlier had officially undertaken to put off the preliminary conditions for the implementation of the various provisions of Security Council resolutions. Such conclusions, in part, flow from the results of the recent negotiations in Baghdad of the Executive Chairman of the Special Commission, Ambassador Case, with the representatives of the government of Iraq. The information submitted by this Special Commission shows that until now Iraq has made no statement concerning its unconditional agreement to implement all of its obligations under Resolutions 687, 707, and also 715 of the Security Council, concerning the implementation of the program of continuous monitoring and verification of Iraq's renunciation of possession of weapons of mass destruction and of ballistic missiles with a range exceeding 150 kilometers. The information conveyed to the Security Council by the IAEA also shows that the information submitted by the Iraqi side is not in keeping with the demands of the plan for the implementation of constant monitoring and verification. Moreover, the Iraqi technical specialists themselves were in agreement with this. In accordance with the demands in those resolutions of the Council, the Special Commission and the IAEA should receive from Iraq comprehensive, final, and a full picture of all aspects of the Iraqi program for weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles with a range exceeding 150 kilometers. Iraq knows, of course, precisely what information must be submitted, since extensive demands in this respect were repeatedly submitted to it by the Special Commission. However, the virtual refusal by the Iraqi side to do this is forcing the Special Commission and its inspection group up to now to gather data in bits and pieces within the framework of the mandate entrusted to it by the Security Council. The inconsistency of repeated Iraqi statements to the effect that all of the information demanded has already been submitted is reaffirmed by the constant discovery during inspections of ever more new and undeclared components which have a direct bearing on Iraqi programs linked with activity banned by these various resolutions. A cause of serious concern for members of the Security Council are the obstacles created by the Iraqi authorities to the work of the Commission, in particular, the recent case of Iraq's refusal to destroy, within the timetable laid down by the Special Commission, of equipment relating to ballistic missiles. Incidentally, paragraph 9 of Resolution 687 clearly shows that such equipment must be destroyed and that Iraqi attempts to dispute this demand are unacceptable. An unsatisfactory situation also exists concerning the implementation of other provisions of Resolution 687. Thus, according to existing data, in Iraq there are still more than 2,000 Kuwaiti citizens who are still detained and citizens of other countries, and the Iraqi authorities are not rendering necessary assistance to the International Committee on the Red Cross in the search for missing persons. They are not providing the representatives of this organization with access to all of the detainees and to all places of detention. There have been inadmissible delays in the process of the return by Iraq of seized Kuwaiti property, including military property. Another subject of particular concern is the repressive policy of the Iraqi authorities towards the civilian population of the country, in particular in those regions where the Kurds live and in the south of the country, which is in violation of the provisions of Council Resolution 688. We and other members of the Council are most sensitive to the fact that, as is indicated by the Special Envoy of the United Nations Secretary General, the Iraqi government has placed limitations on supplies of basic consumer goods to the north of the country. As a result, this region is receiving less than half of the usual deliveries of food products, and its population is experiencing serious deprivation. It should be specifically emphasized that more than 6 months ago, the Council adopted resolutions 706 and 712, which provide Iraq with the opportunity to sell a certain quantity of oil for purposes of financing the purchase of food products, medicines, and materials for humanitarian needs. However, the government of Iraq is refusing to make use of this opportunity. It remains only to voice regret that, while refusing a full and genuine implementation of the decisions of the Security Council, Baghdad is intensifying the sufferings of the Iraqi people and is blocking a mitigation of those sufferings. A most disturbing situation in the human rights area in Iraq is discussed in the report of the Special Rapporteur of the Commission on Human Rights, which has a direct bearing on the question of the implementation of Security Council Resolution 688. The rapporteur came to the unequivocal conclusion that the government of Iraq is responsible for mass systematic violations of human rights, which are of the most serious nature: mass executions, tortures, and genocide. Moreover, as the document notes, there are no indications that the Iraqi government intends to cease this practice. We also believe it important to emphasize the need for unswerving implementation by Iraq of all of its other obligations, in particular those affecting servicing and payment of its foreign debt, as is provided for in paragraph 17 of Resolution 687. Mr. President, one gets the impression that in Baghdad, until now, there still has been no full awareness of the great seriousness of what Iraq has done. For the first time in half a century since the time of the Second World War, one state has occupied and annexed another sovereign state, which is a member of the United Nations, brazenly flouting its obligations under the United Nations Charter and the fundamental principles of international law. More than that, Iraq had drawn up and was starting to implement a program of nuclear weapons production and also was carrying on work in the area of the creation of biological weapons in violations of its obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Convention banning bacteriological and toxic weapons. Iraq had threatened to make use of chemical weapons, and facts of its use of this weapon in the past made these threats particularly ominous. The Security Council, in implementation of responsibilities entrusted to it by the United Nations Charter, drew up and reaffirmed a program of measures aimed at halting these actions which are most dangerous to international peace and security and to prevent a recurrence of such acts. The vital interests of all member states of the United Nations demand an immediate and unswerving implementation of this program. The Russian Federation unequivocally favors the return of Iraq to the international community as a full-fledged member and the lifting of the economic sanctions placed on Iraq. But to do that, the Iraqi government itself must recognize the seriousness of all that it has done, recognize its errors, and from the numerous statements and decisions of the Security Council draw the appropriate conclusions, and instead of confrontation with the Security Council, immediately and fully implement all of its demands. Such an outcome would be in keeping with the interests of the entire international community and, to no less degree, the interests of Iraq itself. There can be no other solution for the Iraqi leadership. And we hope that participation in the work of this meeting of the Security Council of the high-level Iraqi delegation will promote the fact that Baghdad will finally become aware of the responsibility incumbent on it, will begin to cooperate with the United Nations, and will, through its actions, reaffirm its intention fully and unconditionally to implement all provisions of the resolutions of the Security Council which are binding on it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation, Ambassador Lesinski, for his statement and for his very kind words addressed to me. The next speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of China, Ambassador Li Daiyu, to whom I give the floor.
Mr. President, First of all, please allow me to congratulate you on your assumption of the presidency of the Security Council for this month. I'm confident that with your outstanding diplomatic skill and rich experience, you will guide the work of the Security Council for this month to success. I would also like to thank your predecessor, Ambassador Pickering of the United States, who, in an efficient and outstanding manner, has presided over the work of the Council during the busy month of February. I also wish to take this opportunity to congratulate Mr. Vladimir Petrovsky for his assumption of the important post of Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. Mr. President, 1 year after the end of the Gulf War, it is necessary and useful for the Security Council to have a dialogue today with the Iraqi delegation and to discuss the implementation of the Security Council resolutions and the various aspects of the post-war issue. China is always in favor of dialogue and not confrontation. We welcome the decision of the Iraqi government to send its delegation to New York to talk with the Security Council. We hope that this dialogue will achieve positive results, help realize the objectives contained in the relevant Security Council resolutions, and contribute to the restoration of the long-aspired peace and stability in the Gulf region. Mr. President, at the very beginning of the Gulf crisis, China stated in unequivocal terms its principled position of resolutely opposing the Iraqi armed invasion of Kuwait. We have all along stood for the peaceful coexistence among all countries and the peaceful settlement of disputes. This constitutes one of the basic premises of China's proposal for the establishment of a new international political and economic order. Over the past year, in order to remove the consequences of the invasion and to ensure peace and stability in the Gulf region, the international community has acted in cooperation with fruitful results. And the United Nations Secretary General and the agencies concerned have also made valuable contributions to this end. We're pleased to note, as is pointed out by the Secretary General in his report, that significant progress has been made in the implementation of some of the important parts of the resolution. China, like other members of the Security Council, is of the view that the resolutions adopted by the Security Council remain essential to the restoration of peace and stability in the Gulf region and must be fully implemented. Since much remains to be done, we sincerely hope that Iraq will continue to cooperate with the parties concerned and earnestly fulfill its obligations set forth in the relevant resolutions. Mr. President, though the Gulf War was brought to an end a year ago, we have noticed with great anxiety that the difficult situation confronting the Iraqi people continues to deteriorate. China has always held that the Iraqi people are innocent and that it is not fair to prolong their sufferings and hardships. At the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 687, the Chinese delegation pointed out in its statement that, I quote, "we're in favor of an immediate abolition of restrictions on imports into Iraq of foodstuffs and other goods required for the restoration of people's normal life, and a timely and gradual lifting of other economic sanctions against Iraq in light of the development of the situation," unquote. This position of ours remains unchanged. It is precisely out of humanitarian considerations that we have supported the reasonable proposal put forward by the coordinator of the non-aligned states members of the Security Council at the committee established by Resolution 661 that the no objection procedure should be changed to simple notification procedure in allowing Iraq to import civilian products. In our view, this will help alleviate the difficulties of the Iraqi people and be conducive to an early economic recovery in countries of the region. Mr. President, we hope that today's meeting will have a positive impact on the implementation of the relevant Security Council resolutions so that independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the Gulf countries will be safeguarded and respected by the international community. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of China for his statement and for his very kind words addressed to me. The next speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of Japan, Ambassador Yoshio Hatano, to whom I give the floor.
Mr. President, in August 1990, Iraqi troops invaded and occupied Kuwait, violating the sovereignty of that country and contravening international law. With that act of aggression, Iraq reaped the universal condemnation of the international community. Until Iraq perpetrated the aggressive action against its neighbor, Japan had enjoyed good relations with that country, and I therefore regret all the more the course of events over the past year and a half. The tragic consequences of Iraq's actions continue to be felt. Indeed, more than a year has passed since hostilities in the Gulf ended, but the people of Kuwait continue to suffer from the effects of Iraq's aggression in terms of human lives lost, material destruction, and environmental degradation. As a Kuwaiti people, with the assistance of international community, strive to rebuild their lives and their country, Iraq's responsibility for their suffering is not forgotten, and Iraqi leadership is held accountable for the consequences of its aggression. Regrettably, I'm not sure if the Iraqi leadership fully understands the gravity of the present situation. Mr. President, according to UN-related documents, the government of Iraq is persecuting the Kurdish people and Shiite group within its territory. It continues to prevent the repatriation of a large number of Kuwaiti nationals and refuses to return all Kuwaiti property. Moreover, it has repeatedly blocked the efforts of the Special Commission to oversee the destruction of Iraq's weapon of mass destruction and has submitted false reports to the Council. In refusing to cooperate with the Council and to honor its resolutions, the government of Iraq is demonstrating its defiance, not only against the Council, but against the international community as a whole. Iraq's leaders must realize that they are not in a position to decide which provisions they will implement and which ones they will not. There is no room for negotiation. Clearly, the Iraqi people must also be counted among the victims of their government's aggressive actions and its refusal to implement the resolutions of the Security Council. My delegation is concerned about the innocent people of Iraq as they continue to face severe hardship. In this connection, The Security Council agreed to allow Iraq to sell oil so that it can provide for the basic needs of its people. But by refusing to export oil as laid out by the Council, and by creating obstacles to activities of various agencies, the government of Iraq is denying its own people access to humanitarian relief that has been made available. Japan believes the Iraqi leadership has a moral obligation to alleviate the agony of its own people, and that it can do so by exporting its own oil. Japan again urges the government of Iraq to agree once and for all to implement the provisions of all relevant Security Council resolutions. The Council has already made their position known that if Iraq continues material breaches of its obligations, it will have serious consequences. Japan does not want to see Iraq remain as an outcast of international community. Iraq and Iraqi people have suffered enough. I remember how Japan suffered at the end of the last World War, but I still remember how Japan was helped by the international community represented by the United Nations. It is Japan's earnest hope that Iraq will soon be welcomed to the world community as a responsible member. But the only way towards that goal is Iraq's compliance with all the relevant Security Council resolutions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante de Japón.
I thank the Ambassador of Japan, Ambassador Hatano, for his statement. The next speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of Hungary, Ambassador Andrei Erdos, to whom I now give the floor.
Mr. President, thank you very much. 1 year ago, the forces of an international coalition pitted themselves against Iraqi aggression. They liberated Kuwait and thus re-established international legality, acting in accordance with the United Nations Charter. We would like the government of the Republic of Iraq and its distinguished representatives who are with us today to understand how a small country such as Hungary was made acutely aware and distressed by the onerous implications of this act for international relations in general, at seeing a country not only invade another country, but then, after that, deny the very existence of that country and unabashedly proclaim the erasing from the global map of a member country of the United Nations. Therefore, Hungary expressed its full support for the measures taken by the Security Council since the outset of the crisis in the Gulf. After the end of hostilities in the region, the Council, in its numerous resolutions, clearly and unambiguously determined those demands which Iraq would have to meet. In accordance with the United Nations Charter, the members of the organization agree to accept and implement decisions of the Security Council, which bears the primary responsibility for the maintenance of peace and international security. The resolutions of the Council, therefore, cannot be viewed as a basis for negotiation, just as they cannot be the subject for any kind of bargaining. Moreover, the presidential declaration at the end of the meeting of the Council on the level of heads of state and government last January reaffirms that Security Council resolutions must be implemented integrally. We believe that it is dialogue which is the most reasonable and most effective means likely to clarify differences in points of view and to clear up possible misunderstandings. We should like to make it clear, however, that this dialogue between the Security Council and Iraq cannot be an unlimited discussion, and that its sole subject must be the implementation by Iraq of the relevant resolutions of the Council. We deeply deplore the fact that Iraq has not yet fully complied. We expect that the leaders of Iraq, through the Vice Prime Minister of the Republic, will give the Security Council clear guarantees to this end. Mr. President, the key resolution of the Council, Resolution 687, is designed to lead to the re-establishment of security throughout the Gulf region. It was accepted without reservations by the Iraqi National Assembly. The failures of Iraq to implement this resolution, which is of the greatest importance, its attempts to reinterpret a number of provisions of that resolution and of later resolutions of the Council dealing with Iraqi military potential, reveal an attitude which we energetically disapprove and which is the subject of legitimate concern. However, the relevant provisions of these resolutions were drafted with the most scrupulous care, and Iraq's obligations under Part C of Resolution 687 can easily be determined without any possible ambiguity. Moreover, until today, Iraq has on numerous occasions violated a good number of these obligations. It acted thus despite the fact that the Security Council, in the meantime, adopted several other resolutions and, in various forms, firmly condemned the practices pursued by Iraq in this area. At this, certain indications linked to the most recent IAEA inspections would seem to suggest a better understanding by the Iraqi side of the need to demonstrate a more cooperative attitude. However, we are obliged to note that in general, we are not in a position to observe a genuine change in Iraqi behavior. In the area of weapons of mass destruction, of ballistic missiles with a range exceeding 150 kilometers, and of nuclear programs, the general picture which emerges through the Special Commission and the IAEA do not allow us to have a detailed, comprehensive overview of Iraqi programs in this field. As for the information requested, Iraq is sticking to a specific interpretation which considers the information supplied as sufficient information. Practice here continues to glaringly belie this statement. The attitude of the Iraqi side concerning the question of the destruction of material and installations for this purpose is also unsatisfactory. Here, we are seeing delaying tactics. It is up to and will be up to those bodies authorized to do so by the Security Council to determine what Iraq must or must not destroy. We believe that the only way to mitigate the sanctions imposed on Iraq is in the integral application of the Council's resolutions. Iraq must be aware of the serious consequences involved in pursuing its policy of failing to live up to its commitments in this area. Mr. President, we are aware of the consequences of the economic blockade imposed in the north and south of Iraq by the government of the country itself. The attitude of the Iraqi government exposes the entire civilian population of the country to futile suffering. The economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations do not affect the supply of food products, medicines, and other products necessary for satisfying the most fundamental humanitarian needs of the Iraqi civilian population. As we are aware, Security Council resolutions specifically designed to mitigate the suffering of the people of the country established machinery designed to make possible the purchase by Iraq of basic goods. These purchases should be financed from the revenue from the sale of a certain amount of Iraqi oil. Moreover, we do not believe that the Iraqi reference to, in quotes, interference in its internal affairs can justify its refusal to engage in the sale of its oil, and that this is appropriate in the light of the regional policies and practices which this country pursued in the region most recently. Here, we regret that Iraq has deemed it proper unilaterally to break off negotiations on this topic with United Nations representatives in Vienna. So too, it is because of the total lack of Iraqi cooperation that the question of compensation is still deadlocked. We believe that it is also important that Iraq scrupulously live up to all of its obligations concerning the servicing and reimbursing of its foreign debt. A great deal remains to be done concerning the restitution of Kuwaiti property seized by Iraq. Mr. President, another subject of keen concern for Hungary is the human rights situation in Iraq. Violation of these rights continues. We note cases of summary execution, political assassination, cases of torture, disappearances, arbitrary arrest and detention, suppression of the freedom of thought, expression and association, violations of the rights of ethnic and religious communities, etc. Moreover, the Security Council on numerous occasions has expressed its deep concern concerning the repatriation of Kuwaiti nationals and of other states who are in Iraq. In this context, we believe that Iraq's failures here in the area of cooperation with the ICRC are unacceptable. Because of the extraordinary seriousness of the human rights situation in Iraq, in our view, it would be timely to consider in the appropriate United Nations fora the sending to Iraq of an observer team on this subject. Mr. President, the delegation of Hungary hopes that the distinguished representatives of the Republic of Iraq, here present today at this meeting of the Security Council, will be able to return to their country with a clear view of what the international community expects from their government. And it is indeed the integral and unconditional implementation of the relevant resolutions of the Council which are at stake. We would venture to hope that the political message which is reflected in the various views expressed around this table will be heard, understood, and justly evaluated by the Iraqi leadership, which will help all of us in bringing us closer to the end of this gloomy chapter of this period after the end of the Cold War. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante húngaro.
I thank the representative of Hungary, Ambassador Erdos, for his statement. The next speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of Belgium, Ambassador Paul Notre-Dame, to whom I now give the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I should like to take advantage of this opportunity to welcome you as President of the Security Council. We should like to assure you, Mr. President, of the full cooperation of my delegation. I should also like to congratulate and thank Ambassador Pickering for the outstanding work which he did over the last month. Allow me also to say how much we appreciate the presence in the Council of Mr. Petrovsky, and to add a word here also to thank his predecessor, Mr. Savanchuk, with whom we worked so well. Mr. President, throughout the Gulf crisis, Belgium's policy was motivated by objectives based on respect for international law. The goal was to obtain the liberation of Kuwait, to avoid a reoccurrence of such aggression, and to make Iraq once again play a positive role within the international community. Kuwait was liberated, and our council itself laid down the conditions for the ceasefire. Iraq, moreover, notified the Council of its unconditional acceptance of Resolution 687, and that acceptance was reaffirmed by a decision of the Iraqi National Assembly. Unfortunately, in terms of deeds, Iraq continues to trample underfoot several provisions of Resolution 687 and provisions found in other relevant resolutions of the Security Council. The Secretary General's report is most eloquent in this respect. Thus, for our efforts concerning international law to remain credible, there is a need for the Council to see for strict respect by Iraq of its obligations. I should like to add that this firm attitude does not make us unaware of the plight of the Iraqi population held hostage by its government. Mr. President, to achieve the objectives which the Council has laid down, the Iraqi government, therefore, must respect all of its international obligations. I'm thinking specifically of three areas. First of all, Iraq must erase those ravages which its aggression has caused. Indeed, the liberation of Kuwait, through the legitimate use of armed force, was not sufficient to avoid the consequences of a brutal and bloody occupation made up of pillage, destruction, and acts of force. This is why there was a need to impose on Iraq a number of measures linked to the exchange of prisoners and the return of property stolen from Kuwait. Moreover, the establishment of a compensation fund here would seem to be an essential innovation designed to obtain from Iraq a just contribution to compensate for the damage resulting from the invasion and illegal occupation of Kuwait. Secondly, Iraq must fully dismantle and unconditionally dismantle its potential for mass destruction. It is the accumulation of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the intransigence and the warlike attitude of the Baghdad authorities which forced the Security Council to establish disarmament machinery and a military embargo against Iraq. Belgium hopes that the implementation of these measures will be a first step towards the re-establishment of peace and international security throughout the region. Third, the government of Iraq must respect human rights. I should like here to note the great concern of my authorities upon reading the report on the human rights situation in Iraq, which was prepared by Mr. van der Stoel, the Special Rapporteur of the Commission on Human Rights. The information which we have been receiving over these last few months concerning the armed and brutal repression carried out by the Iraqi regime towards its population and the discriminatory measures applied to certain groups compound our concern. During consideration by the General Assembly of the situation in the Middle East, the member states of the European Community once again repeated in their statement made on the 26th of November 1991 their concerns in this respect. As long as these violations of human rights continue, Iraq still will be far from having effectively fulfilled its international obligations. Mr. President, the firm position of the Council, which Belgium shares, does not, however, mean that my country is insensitive to the suffering of the Iraqi people, which has unfortunately been held hostage by its authorities since the outset of the crisis. Belgium has always emphasized the need to grant humanitarian assistance to the population of Iraq, regardless of any other considerations. This is why we had favorably viewed a lifting of the food embargo provisionally by the Committee on Sanctions. We were then gratified by its final lifting during the adoption of Resolution 687. We have constantly worked for effective maintenance of the policy of a hand held out toward the population of Iraq. Based on the same humanitarian concern, Belgium was in favor of Resolution 706 and 712, which allow Iraq to acquire revenue needed to finance its food and humanitarian imports. And a few days ago, Belgium supported the adoption in the Committee on Sanctions of a gentleman's agreement, which should allow for even more flexible and rapid consideration of requests concerning a series of products. Thus, the Iraqi government has available the means for improving the humanitarian situation of its population. It is up to it, and up to it alone, to use or not to use them. My country therefore urgently calls on it to put into effect these two resolutions. Since it has the necessary resources, the Iraqi government then would have the responsibility to guarantee the equitable distribution of food and humanitarian products to the Iraqi population as a whole without any discrimination. Unfortunately, we must note that such is not always the case, and that entire sectors of the Iraqi population are disadvantaged. We expect that Iraq will put an end to these discriminatory practices. If the most recent information which we have available stress a general improvement of the food situation, they also reaffirm to us the existence of an economic blockade imposed in the north of Iraq. Therefore, the Kurdish population of Iraq is only receiving half of the daily food rations distributed in the rest of the country. This unacceptable situation must stop. In this context, the security officials of the United Nations in Iraq are making an invaluable contribution to the work both of humanitarian agencies of the United Nations and of non-governmental organizations. My delegation would like to pay tribute to them. The extension of their mandate will be for us one of the guarantees of the good intentions of the Iraqi government. Mr. President, the policy pursued up to now by the Iraqi authorities has, for us, been only a source of deep distrust. It is therefore now up to the Iraqi government to dispel that distrust by formal and clear commitments demonstrated through specific acts. Belgium hopes that the present meeting of the Council will be an opportunity for Iraq finally to undertake those commitments which flow from the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of Belgium, Ambassador Notre Dame, for his statement and for his kind words. The next speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of Ecuador, Ambassador José Ayala Lasso, to whom I give the floor. Thank you, Mr. President. May I first of all congratulate you on your assumption of the presidency of the Security Council for the month of March. We know that you will be leading our work to a successful conclusion. I also want to express my congratulations for the excellent work done as President of the Council in February by Ambassador Tom Pickering of the United States of America. Mr. President, the position that Ecuador has adopted in analyzing the Gulf crisis, a consideration which began when Kuwait was invaded militarily by Iraq, was a position based strictly on respect for the norms of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. These principles include exclusive use of peaceful methods to resolve disputes, condemnation of the use of force against the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of states, non-recognition of territorial conquests obtained through the use of force, and in particular, a shared obligation to contribute to the establishment of a peaceful, more just, and free world. The only objective of this is to meet the all-important aspirations of the human being. In using its authorities under the United Nations Charter, the Security Council adopted a series of resolutions that set obligations whose complete compliance is the responsibility of Iraq. Resolution 687 contains those aspects deemed essential to resolve the problems created by the invasion of Kuwait. One of these refers to weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. There can be no doubt in this respect that the work conferred upon the Special Commission, in spite of the contradictory initial attitude and concealment on the part of Iraq, has been conducted with greater magnitude in respect of the destruction of these weapons. The Commission has reported the positive advances that the Council must also recognize. It will nonetheless be necessary for Iraq to broaden its cooperation in all areas related to the presentation of plans and programs that Iraq has prepared in this respect, as required by the Special Commission. There are obligations that stem from the resolutions of the Security Council, whose fulfillment means specific action, and there are others that require, in order to be implemented, an ongoing, permanent conduct. Ecuador believes that the fulfillment of the mandates of the Council must be complete and without exception. We recognize that because of its very characteristics, that compliance may not in every case be verified immediately. Nonetheless, it is up to the Council and will be up to the Council to evaluate the correct implementation of its resolutions, taking into account the good faith that Iraq must demonstrate. Ecuador and the Security Council have shown their constant concern at the plight of the Iraqi population, the population in large cities, as well as the minorities in the north and south of Iraq. Because of humanitarian concerns, Ecuador has supported the Council's taking measures to meet the extreme needs of the Iraqi population. My country will continue to support any initiative aimed at that objective. Nonetheless, there can be no doubt that the most conducive way of ensuring that result will be, as has been shown in practice, compliance by the Iraqi government with all the resolutions of the Security Council. Furthermore, Iraq must make use of the mechanisms provided in Resolutions 688, 706, and 712. For those same humanitarian reasons, Mr. President, we are extremely concerned at the situation of lack of respect for human rights in Iraq. The report submitted in this respect by Mr. Max van der Stoel is of an eloquence that should give us a great deal of reflection and that should prompt Iraq to take immediate corrective measures. Among the obligations that must be fulfilled by Iraq is that of facilitating and carrying out the repatriation of Kuwaiti nationals and nationals of other countries. We hope that the next meeting, which will be held with the participation of the International Committee of the Red Cross, will provide better results than those that we have observed thus far. We consider as highly useful the minister that Deputy Minister Tariq Aziz is making to the Security Council. This is a positive sign of cooperation with the United Nations. We do not categorize his visit as a negotiation mission, which is something that would not be fitting, but rather as an opportunity for dialogue in order to exchange views. And we feel that this dialogue may help to clear the picture and to find specific solutions to the problems which we all wish to see resolved. We hope to receive from His Excellency, Mr. Tariq Aziz, first-hand information, satisfactory responses to the points raised by the President of the Security Council on behalf of all members. And above all, we hope that the Iraqi government will resolve to adopt those measures that will make it feasible for the Council to react immediately under the United Nations Charter to restore normalcy in the region, both as regards the plight of the Iraqi population and respect for the norms of law. Only in this way will it be possible to restore peace, security, and justice following the tragic conflict in the Gulf. Thank you, Mr. President.
Representante del Ecuador.
I thank the representative of Ecuador, Ambassador José Ayala Lasso, for his statement and for his kind words addressed to me. The next speaker on my list is the representative of India, Ambassador Chinmaya Rasinana Garekan, to whom I now give the floor.
Mr. President, may I begin by felicitating you on your assumption of the presidency of the Council for this month. You bring to this high office a wealth of experience that I am confident will materially contribute to the success of the Council's activities. I should also like to place on record my delegation's deep appreciation at the outstandingly professional and energetic manner in which the permanent representative of the United States, Ambassador Pickering, presided over the Council's work last month. May I also extend a word of welcome to our new Undersecretary General, Mr. Petrovsky. Mr. President, some of my colleagues would recall that when the Council adopted Resolution 687 last year, it similarly met during the month of Ramadan and sat through the lunch period. It is appropriate that as we take stock of 687 today, we are once again sitting through the lunch break during this holy month of Ramadan. Today's meeting, Mr. President, is a special one. It endeavors to address issues emerging during and after the upheavals of late 1990 and early 1991 in the Gulf region. The Security Council, between August 1990 and mid-1991, convened in a series of meetings that created a framework of action in response to the Gulf crisis and its aftermath. Kuwait has not only regained its sovereignty and independence, but has also started active participation in international political and economic exchanges. We are now meeting to take stock of what has happened since then and what more needs to be done. Mr. President, Resolution 687, as we all know, is a landmark decision of the Council. Subsequent Council resolutions have gone into this or that aspect of the crisis, but Resolution 687 is the basic document. It is important to note that Iraq and the international community as a whole, represented in the Security Council's agreed decisions, have accepted that resolution and have to come together in an attempt to preserve and strengthen international peace and security. Needless to say, all countries committed to the Council decisions in this regard assume the responsibility to comply with and implement them. In my delegation's view, therefore, the basic premise of today's exercise is respect for and full implementation of Security Council resolutions adopted under Chapter 7 of the Charter on this particular issue. Mr. President, it is not my intention to go into the details of the very important issue we are examining today, since we already have authoritative documentation on the subject. The Council has before it the Secretary General's report of 25th January 1992, document S/23514, on the extent of Iraqi compliance with the obligations placed upon it by the relevant Council resolutions, as well as his further report dated the 7th of March, document S/23687. I should like to express my appreciation to the Secretary General for his detailed and informative reports, which indeed are the only basis on which the Security Council can and should conduct its work. Both reports identify areas where such compliance has either been achieved or actively pursued, and areas where compliance is yet to be achieved. My delegation has taken note of the assessment contained in Secretary General's report that significant progress has been achieved in respect of Section C of Resolution 687, but that much remains to be done. What remains also must be implemented. The necessity of compliance of all such mandatory provisions of the resolution, which are inherently integral, has been underlined by the Council on numerous occasions. Mr. President, in our task, we are assisted by the presence of the distinguished Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, His Excellency Dr. Tariq Aziz, along with his colleagues. His long experience at the highest levels of his country's government provides this Council with a unique opportunity of finding the answers and commitments it seeks. My delegation, and I'm sure the Security Council as a whole, appreciates his willingness to be present here and engage in a constructive exchange of views. A second basic premise in my delegation's reckoning should be humanitarian. The Council is aware of the incontestable and well-documented hardships suffered by innocent civilians in Iraq. Non-aligned members of the Council have repeatedly stressed the need for a humanitarian approach in this regard. I must record my delegation's disappointment at the meager progress achieved in this area. The Council has yet to formally accept the proposal of the non-aligned members to transfer items of undeniable humanitarian need from the no objection procedure to the notification category. I trust, nonetheless, that today's meeting will lead to early, meaningful Council action at addressing the urgent humanitarian context. Mr. President, an issue of importance in addressing the humanitarian aspects of this crisis, or indeed any other crisis that invokes Security Council action under Chapter 7, is the operation of Article 50 of the United Nations Charter. My delegation on several occasions has reiterated the need to strengthen the overall impact and influence of Council action by the activation in concrete terms of Article 50, enabling countries that faithfully implement Council resolutions to obtain redress wherever such implementation adversely affects them. Mr. President, I shall make one final point. Today's meeting, I hope, will delve upon the possibility and the means of achieving what the international community aspires to in the Gulf region and around the world, namely peace and prosperity for all. Our aim is to overcome divergences in views and misunderstandings and to promote trust and cooperation. Today's opportunity of a dialogue with the distinguished Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq should serve precisely these purposes and open the doors to early, peaceful resolution of all outstanding problems in the Gulf. India's relations with Gulf countries have been marked down the centuries by goodwill and cooperation. This explains why my country fervently hopes that the international community can work together to put the grim and sad chapter of the Gulf conflict behind it and strive towards the fulfillment of ideals that the Charter of the United Nations seeks to achieve. If we can bring about such a turn of events, we shall have learned the most valuable lesson of all emerging from the Gulf crisis. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of India, Ambassador Ghari Khan, for his statement and for his kind words, and also for his understanding and recognition of Ramadan, for which this morning's meeting is being prolonged. I now give the floor to Mr. José Eduardo Barbosa, the representative of Cape Verde.
I would like to start by congratulating you for your assumption of the Council's presidency. I am sure that during your mandate, much will be accomplished by this Council under your skillful leadership. I would like to express my congratulations to your predecessor, Ambassador Thomas Pickering, for the very able and efficient manner in which he conducted the deliberations of the Council last month. Mr. President, Cape Verde strongly believes in the principles of the peaceful settlement of disputes and the non-use of force in international relations. As a small country, we are very much against any violation of those principles and against the violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of any country. That is why we strongly condemned the invasion of Kuwait last year, and we shared the outrage of the international community towards the unprovoked aggression against that defenseless small country by Iraq. As a consequence of the Iraq invasion of Kuwait, which brought about damages to the country and loss to lives and poverty to the population of Kuwait, and posed a threat to the security in the area, this Council adopted a series of resolutions imposing sanctions against Iraq and prescribing measures in order to reverse the aggression and redress the damages and pains caused. We believe that this Council, by imposing the sanctions against Iraq, took a proper and adequate position to reestablish peace and security of Kuwait and to impose the respect for the rule of law in accordance with the United Nations Charter. we ascribe the utmost importance to the need for the implementation of the resolutions adopted by this Council in this respect. We have been following the various reports of the Secretariat on the status on the implementation of the resolution on sanctions by Iraq. Although we have taken note of reports on partial implementation of certain aspects of the resolutions by that country, we regret to say that in general, Iraq has fallen short of complying fully with the decisions of this Council. Your assessment, Mr. President, on the status of the implementation of the decisions of the Security Council is a clear demonstration of that country's failure in fully complying with this Council's resolution. We share entirely your assessment, and we would like to appeal to the government of Iraq to be more forthcoming in its acceptance and compliance with the relevant Security Council's decision. We are particularly sensitive to the situation of Kuwaiti prisoners and third countries in nationals in Iraq. We expect Iraq to be more cooperative in order to obtain their release and facilitate access to them. We would very much like to see this meeting as a first step of a process that would further promote the implementation of the Council's resolution. We believe that the complete and full compliance thereon would very much facilitate the lifting of sanctions and would reestablish peace and cooperation in the area. We are aware of the painful situation in which the brotherly people of Iraq is living as a result of the United Nations sanctions. We are very much sensitive to their needs, and we expect soon to see progress in compliance with the Security Council resolutions so that living conditions of the Iraqi people can be eased. In this context, we are of the view that this Council should continue to be sensitive to the humanitarian needs at the Iraqi population. We are not and will never be against the people of Iraq, but we are in favor, and very much so, of strict observance of the Charter provisions. While we are for the Iraq's compliance of the Security Council's resolution, we are also sensitive to the legitimate needs of its people. The economic development of Iraq should not be therefore unduly affected so as to preserve their peaceful civilian economic capacity. The purpose of the sanctions against Iraq is to restore the situation as it existed before the invasion of Kuwait, to repair the damages and losses suffered, and to create a situation that would guarantee peace and security in the area, and should not affect unnecessarily the economic structure and the future well-being of the Iraq people. Finally, Mr. President, we would like to express the wish that the presence of the Iraq high-level delegation here today will be the beginning of a dialogue that would promote better understanding, which would facilitate the full and complete implementation of the Council's resolutions and would eventually restore normalcy in Kuwait and Iraq for the benefit of the two sisterly countries and their respective people. I thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of Cape Verde for his statement and for his very kind words addressed to me. The next speaker on my list is the representative of Zimbabwe, Ambassador Simbarashe Mumbengegwi, to whom I now give the floor.
Mr. President, let me begin by congratulating you on your assumption of the presidency of our council. Your well-known diplomatic skills will no doubt enable us to deal effectively with the onerous matters before the Council this month. I would also like to congratulate Ambassador Pickering of the United States for the excellent way he conducted the Council's business during the month of February. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Petrovsky on the assumption of his duties as the Under-Secretary General with whom we will be working, and also thank his predecessor, Mr. Safranchuk, for the very good work he did during his term of office. Mr. President, we welcome in our midst His Excellency, Deputy Prime Minister Aziz of Iraq and his delegation. The offer by the government of Iraq to have this high-level delegation give first-hand explanation of progress, problems, and policies attended to Iraq's implementation of and compliance with Security Council resolutions is indeed welcome. As members of the Security Council, we consider it imperative that Council resolutions should be complied with without reservation. Recent history has shown the Council's determination to enforce such compliance and has given us reason to hope that such collective will of the international community to right wrongs and protect the vulnerable is on the ascendancy. The Security Council's authority and credibility, as well as its moral stature, can only be enhanced if the principle of enforcement of Security Council resolutions is applied uniformly and consistently, regardless of who the offender might be. Mr. President, we have before us the Secretary General's updated report on the extent of Iraq compliance with Security Council resolutions. We are very grateful to the Secretary General for his very comprehensive and factual report. We sincerely hope that Deputy Prime Minister Aziz and his delegation will be able to explain to the Council reasons for the delays in implementing the relevant resolutions, as the Secretary General's report indicates. Of great concern to us, Mr. President, is the humanitarian situation in the region, a cause we have seized the Council with on previous occasions. Following the adoption of Resolution 687 and its subsequent and unconditional acceptance by Iraq last year, we had hoped that normalcy would speedily and smoothly be restored to the Gulf area so that the people of the region would be spared further suffering. My delegation is deeply concerned that almost a year after the end of the war, the serious humanitarian situation in the region shows no signs of diminishing. We need not remind this Council of its moral obligation to do all in its power to ease the suffering of the civilian population in the region. The Iraqi authorities too must carry out their responsibility in this regard. In this connection, Mr. President, we are deeply concerned about the still unresolved question of missing Kuwaiti nationals as disclosed in the report of the ICRC dated January 16, 1992. The Geneva Convention's provisions and Resolution 687 clearly impose upon Iraq an obligation to release all Kuwaiti nationals in its custody and to do so expeditiously in cooperation with the International Committee of the Red Cross. We call upon Iraq to cooperate fully and provide the ICRC with information relating to the missing persons, to facilitate searches by the ICRC, and to accede to requests by the ICRC to undertake searches for the missing persons in accordance with ICRC norms and practices. Mr. President, my delegation will be listening very carefully to Deputy Prime Minister Aziz's message and explanations, and is looking forward to a constructive and fruitful discussion by this Council arising from his statement. I thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias al
I thank the representative of Zimbabwe, Ambassador Mumbengegwe, for his statement and for the kind words that he addressed to me. The next speaker inscribed on my list is the representative of Morocco, Ambassador Ahmed Lisnoussi. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like, first of all, to express my warmest congratulations to you on your assumption of the presidency of our Council for the month of March. And I would like to tell you that we've already very much appreciated your outstanding human qualities and your effectiveness. I also want to avail myself of this opportunity, of course, to congratulate Ambassador Pickering for his work as President in February and for the spirit of friendship and cooperation with which he imbued our work. I would also like, Mr. President, to extend a welcome to His Excellency, Mr. Tariq Aziz, and the Iraqi delegation accompanying him. By inviting them to participate in our work, the Council wished to give that country an opportunity and possibility of informing us firsthand of the reasons for all the delays and difficulties being experienced in the implementation of the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. But the Council also wished to give them an opportunity to speak to us of the efforts being made by that country to meet its commitments undertaken following the war. My country, as an Arab country and as a member of that large international community, has suffered cruelly from the fratricidal struggle in the region, and we deplore and continue to deplore the cataclysm that followed that major catastrophe. The Arab community, Mr. President, is anxious to see that region find once again its peace of heart and mind. The Security Council undoubtedly has wished to express its vigilance, but also its readiness and its openness to listen. The different commissions of the United Nations that have gone to Iraq have reported many failings in the implementation of the Security Council's resolutions. Iraq, for its part, says that a large number of the resolutions, in fact, have been applied. The Council wished to demonstrate that it is not a cold machine, that it is able not to disregard the human contingencies and the difficulties inherent in that war that put so many families in a state of mourning. At this stage, it is up to the Iraqi government to assure us and reassure us of its will to ensure the strict implementation of Council resolutions. And it is also up to this Council to attach importance to the humanitarian needs of the innocent civilian population of Iraq, as described in the Summit Statement S-23, 1500 of January 1992. Your statement today, Mr. President, is clear, precise, and relevant. It undoubtedly constitutes the best possible program of work for this Council. It should make it possible for the distinguished Iraqi delegation, through its answers, to provide the best indication of its will to implement the Council's resolutions, and at the same time to explain its concerns and its problems. Mr. President, as was stressed by our distinguished colleague from India, the month of Ramadan is a month of abstinence, but it is at the same time a month of prayer. May we hope that this meeting will be the opportunity to recreate a real peace, so that our Iraqi colleagues will leave with the sense that the Council listened to them in an objective way, and that our Council will become convinced that it is dealing with a responsible country, a country that is keeping its commitments and that wishes to work toward peace and harmony. Thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank Ambassador Esnousi for his very kind words. Now, in my capacity as representative of Venezuela, I would like to make a statement, and I will then give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Tariq Aziz, the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Distinguished members of the Security Council, Venezuela considers it of highest significance that His Excellency, Mr. Tariq Aziz, the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, is here before the Security Council. Iraq is a member state of the United Nations, and it is important to emphasize that it can and must make use of all of its forums in order to implement the Charter of the United Nations. So we welcome the initiative taken by Iraq to establish a direct dialogue with the Security Council. Venezuela, in participating in this discussion, cannot fail to take into account the fact that the cause of the crisis, which we are discussing today, is the sole and entire responsibility of the government of Iraq, which in violation of the norms and principles of international law invaded militarily and annexed to its territory the state of Kuwait and then proceeded to devastate that state. We are confident that at this meeting the Council is beginning an exhaustive consideration of the situation in Iraq. This gives us an opportunity to make constructive progress, and it is important to highlight here that decisions in this respect are decisions that must be taken almost exclusively by the Iraqi government. We are convinced that it will be possible to do this only if Iraq meets the obligations imposed by the Security Council, which Iraq has unconditionally pledged to implement and entirely to implement. Iraq, I would emphasize, has not used the mechanism of sale of oil in order to help feed its population, which is suffering unnecessarily from this attitude, which is in every way contrary to the basic interests of its people. Above and beyond this appeal of a humanitarian nature, I would like to express Venezuela's hope that Iraq will, as soon as possible, meet all of its international obligations so that its people will be able once again to aspire to economic and social development to which it is completely entitled. We consider it of a priority and urgent nature that Iraq fully fulfill the compensations that are required, especially in respect of Kuwait, and Iraq's obligations in respect of disappeared persons, property, border, boundary disputes must be met as soon as possible. We're also confident that the government of Iraq will understand its responsibilities vis-à-vis mankind to ensure the national reconciliation of its people with full respect for the human rights of all citizens, many of whom are now subjected to untold and unjustifiable violations of their human rights. Lastly, I would like to emphasize Venezuela's interest in seeing international peace and security, and in particular harmony among all friendly countries of the region, with which my country Venezuela has relations and shared interests. That peace and harmony will be restored as soon as possible, and toward that end we feel it is essential that Iraq unconditionally fulfill the mandates of this Council, which have been reiterated today by the President of the Council and by the representatives that have preceded me in speaking. Iraq, which will today have the floor in this Council, has in its hands and through its decisions the decisive responsibility in normalizing its relations with the world, symbolized here by the Security Council of the United Nations. I once again assume the presidency of the Council, and the next speaker on my list is the distinguished Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, His Excellency Mr. Tariq Aziz, to whom I give the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the first time for us to have been given the opportunity to submit our point of view before the Security Council at this level in respect of the Council's dealing with Iraq. Military force was used against Iraq during the period from 17 January to the 28th of February 1991 under the umbrella of Resolution 678 adopted by the Security Council on the 28th of November 1990. Indeed, even after the cessation of military operations, some formations of our armed forces continued to receive airstrikes such as those of the 2nd of March 1991. The whole world knows the way in which this resolution has been implemented to inflict in a deliberate manner a total destruction of the whole civilian infrastructure in Iraq. The roads, bridges, power plants, water treatment plants, civilian factories, including an infant milk factory, dams and communication centers. In addition to all of this, there was the damage and destruction inflicted on the civilian population, their properties and their residential centers, on mosques, churches, schools and colleges, hospitals and medicine stores, civilian shelters and foodstuff storage buildings. The facts of the terrible, full-scale and iniquitous destruction are now known to all the fair-minded people in the world. Dozens of books and reports have been published on the subject. Many documentary films made and several symposia held in various parts of the world, including the city. I quote here Ambassador Marty Ahtisaari, the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, who visited Baghdad during the period between the 10th and 17th of March 1991 and wrote a report on the visit. The report forwarded by the Secretary General to the President of the Security Council with a letter dated on the 30th of March 1991. Ambassador Ahtisaari wrote, "Most means of modern life support have been destroyed or rendered tenuous. Iraq has for some time to come been relegated to a pre-industrial age." End of quote. Not only we, but also members of the Security Council, including permanent members, have said that the operations of destruction carried out had gone beyond the framework of Resolution 678, which became a political tool used to destroy a free, independent country. However, you are aware that Iraq informed the Council on the 28th of February 1991 of its acceptance to comply fully with Resolution 660 and all the other resolutions of the Security Council. Then came Resolution 686 on the 2nd of March 1991, stating a reaffirmation of the commitment of all member states to Iraq's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Having adopted this resolution, the Council moved on to formulating the grounds and measures necessary for an official ceasefire to be declared. Resolution 687 was then adopted on the 3rd of April 1991. This resolution came up with such measures and conditions as had never been precedented in the whole history of the United Nations. For these measures and conditions transcended by a large degree the initial limits and declared objectives of the Council's previous resolutions. As an independent sovereign state, Iraq stated its views about this resolution on the basis of the United Nations Charter, international law, and the principles of fairness and justice. However, the Iraqi government accepted the resolution in order to to ward off the dangers threatening the people of Iraq. More than 11 months have elapsed now since Resolution 687 was adopted, during which Iraq has seriously endeavored to implement its provisions. And I wish to point out in this respect that the Iraqi Minister of Foreign Affairs had sent on the 23rd of January 1992 a comprehensive letter in which he demonstrated in an objective manner, supported by evidence, how much Iraq had implemented of the provisions contained in the resolution. The contents of that letter, which I hope all members have read in depth, makes clear that the fundamental contents of the resolution had already been implemented. Mr. President, while I request that the contents of the comprehensive letter of the Iraqi Minister of Foreign Affairs, to which I have referred, to be regarded as a part connected with the contents of the present statement on the Council's assessment of the situation, I ask you to permit me to focus in some detail on certain aspects of the subject. Aspects that have, since last summer, often become cause for problems and allegations thrown at Iraq without careful examination. The weapons which Iraq is prohibited from possessing have been totally destroyed. Whatever remains, especially in the missiles and chemical ammunition fields, is being successively destroyed under the supervision of the inspection teams and according to a plan about which there is no argument between the Iraqi authorities concerned and these teams. As to the equipment used or allegedly used in producing those weapons, they have all been identified, for the inspection teams have visited all the factories and sites they wanted to visit. So the equipment there, examine them and mark them with labels ensuring their non-use henceforth. During the period from April 1991 to February 1992, 29 inspection teams visited Iraq, with an overall membership of nearly 400 inspectors, who spent a total of 240 days in the country, i.e. about 8 months of continuous work, during which the inspection teams conducted 415 inspection operations, including 127 surprise visits made without prior notice to locations spread all over Iraq, and for which they used the most advanced and sophisticated means of detection, communications, reconnaissance and transport, including the helicopters used for conducting large-scale aerial surveys over many plans of Iraq. The number of survey operations conducted with those planes was about 45, while the number of flights made for this and other purposes was about 120, each flight lasting between 4 and 8 hours. During this period, too, U.S. U-2 reconnaissance planes conducted 32 operations over Iraq. The aerial survey and reconnaissance operations conducted by these planes took an average of 3 to 4 hours each. The various inspection teams have supervised 40 operations of destruction of missile systems, chemical weapons, equipment and their accessories. The items already destroyed under the supervision of the inspection teams have reached a total of around 14,000. These have ranged from half-manufactured parts to missiles and rocket launchers, from machines and equipment to empty chemical ammunition shells. In addition, the Iraqi side has destroyed more than 270,000 items, I repeat, 270,000 items ranging from parts and pieces to machines and equipment, the remains of which have been examined by the inspection teams. More than 1,500 tons of raw materials have also been destroyed. The number of the various machines and equipment which the inspection teams have put their seals on and prevented from being moved has reached nearly 1,000. In addition to what was destroyed during the military operations, which left none of the locations of the said activities without inflicting great damage on its buildings and equipment. The clear conclusion to be left with from all this is that Iraq is no longer in possession of any weapons, munitions or major or minor systems prohibited by the Resolution 687. The equipment used or allegedly used in producing such items have been identified, and their use has either been frozen or turned to civilian industries or to industries not prohibited by Resolution 687. All this is taking place under the supervision of the inspection teams. This fundamental fact has been deliberately hidden from the Council with a view to keeping it in a climate of suspicion as to the position of Iraq. Let me now address a second matter which has also been used as a pretext to raise doubts and ill-intended allegations against Iraq. I mean by that the detained Kuwaitis in Iraq. Since the 4th of March 1991, the Iraqi authorities concerned have repatriated in cooperation with the International Committee of the Red Cross 6,520 Kuwaitis and third country nationals. There are now in Iraq 3,594 Kuwaitis who are not detainees there but live in freedom and are registered with the ICRC office in Baghdad. But the Kuwaiti authorities have agreed to the return of only 468 of them. It is worth mentioning that while the Kuwaiti authorities, which have submitted a list containing 2,242 persons, claim to be in Iraq, 233 of these are proven to have been returned to Kuwait through the ICRC, and 59 of them remain in Iraq awaiting approval from the Kuwaiti authorities for their return. We have stated our position on this matter to the Council more than once, as well as to the League of Arab States, from which we received an envoy who came to see the facts of the situation. The false allegation, however, that Iraq is holding Kuwaiti individuals as detainees continues to be thrown about by certain governments without bothering to ask themselves the obvious question: why should Iraq do this thing? And I wish to ask, what benefit does Iraq expect to gain from detaining 1,000 or 2,000 Kuwaiti citizens when Iraq has already repatriated high-ranking Kuwaiti officers and other high officials, including 20 members of the ruling family in Kuwait? In order to remove any vagueness or equivocation and reach the truth, we addressed an official note to the ICRC on the 20th of February 1992, in which we requested that this whole matter be entrusted to the ICRC to take whatever measures it deems appropriate in order to determine the facts. I was informed here that implementing the procedures with the ICRC has begun. The newspapers in Iraq have started to publish that in 3 newspapers as of the 10th of this month, and this will take place once a week and for 4 weeks running. The same thing goes for the subject of properties. We have submitted inventories, expressed willingness to return the items, and have indeed returned great numbers and huge quantities of them. That there are other items to be returned is not an Iraqi responsibility, but the responsibility of the Secretary General's delegate entrusted to take the measures required for the properties to be received from Iraq, which has reiterated its readiness to cooperate and facilitate the task. While I find it sufficient to mention these matters in relation to the provisions of Resolution 687, I wish to reaffirm that Iraq, as it is clearly stated in the letter of the Foreign Minister of Iraq, to which I have referred, has indeed fulfilled the greatest and most fundamental part of the provisions of the resolution in relation to the other matters addressed in sections A, B, D, and H of the resolution. The implementation of the remaining provisions, which by their nature require a period of time to be fully implemented, is being carried out in the proper manner, and Iraq is extending serious and professional cooperation in order to achieve such implementation. Mr. President, paragraph 21 of Resolution 687 stipulates that the Security Council review the provisions of paragraph 20, which provides for the continuation of the embargo in light of the implementation of the relevant resolutions of the Council, in order that the Council should determine whether to ease or lift the sanctions referred to in the said paragraph. The Council has continued since it conducted its first review of Iraq's compliance in June 1991 to declare after each review that Iraq had not yet fully complied with the resolution, which meant that the embargo upon Iraq remained in place and that the sufferings of the 18 million Iraqis continued unmitigated. We have sent many notes and letters to the Council, and our permanent representative spoke repeatedly before the Council, explaining Iraq's position and the extent of its fulfillment of the provisions of the Resolution 687. But all these efforts have been ignored under pressure from a small but influential and perhaps even tyrannical number of members of the Council. Now and again, storms of false allegations and ill-intended extremist conclusions were raised against Iraq's position on one subject or the other. The Council was repeatedly put in an atmosphere of distortion aimed at suggesting a non-compliance by Iraq with the provisions of the resolution. Some members of the inspection teams visiting Iraq have been selected from people linked to the intelligence services of certain countries in order to create problems and hence keep the Council in this atmosphere of distortion. I wish here to remind the Council that the first steps of implementing Resolution 687 were taken during the weeks and months immediately following the cessation of the military operations when Iraq was suffering bitterly from the impact of the total destruction which had left the country without electricity, communications, or transport, and resulted in the destruction of its buildings, documents, and other damages caused by tens of thousands of tons of explosives dropped all over Iraq. None of the parties adopting the resolution has attempted to show any understanding of or sympathy with the terrible, tragic situation forced upon Iraq. A series of demands and decisions on the implementation of this or that paragraph of the resolution was taken in rapid succession and came hammering down regardless of the facts of the situation suffered by Iraq. I am also forced here to remind the Council, and through it the international community, that the countries to which I have made reference did not stop at Iraq's compliance with the provisions of the Resolution 687 as a condition to lifting the economic sanctions. Weeks after the resolution had been adopted and Iraq began implementing its provisions, those countries announced that they wouldn't be prepared to lift the economic embargo until the political leadership of Iraq was replaced. These countries continue reiterating this precondition, despite its flagrant contradiction with the principles of the United Nations Charter and with the contents of the resolutions issued by the Council itself. Thus, those states have exploited Resolution 687 to achieve political objectives not accommodated for in the resolution in the way as they exploited Resolution 678, as I explained earlier. The noisy storms, newfangled by certain elements in this inspection teams, who came to serve the objectives of those countries were exploited to issue new council resolutions containing provisions even more extremist than those contained in Resolution 687 without regard to Iraq's difficult circumstances. The objective was to blackmail Iraq and keep it in the finger of accusation pointed at it, use this false and distorted climate to maintain the iniquitous economic embargo imposed upon the people of Iraq, and ultimately exploit the situation in a manner that would enable the said countries to issue, whenever they chose to, threats of the use of force against Iraq, once again, in order to accomplish the objectives envisaged by them for a change of the political system in Iraq, and indeed to complete the fulfillment of the dream to destroy Iraq. Mr. President, in our notes and letters to the Council, while talking to Ambassador Ikios during his 3 visits to Baghdad, particularly the last visit, we have said, you keep raising doubts about this issue, all that. So let us sit together at the level of experts from both the Special Commission and from Iraq in order to review every aspect and every question. Let us discuss every subject, and we are ready to cooperate, as we have done on many occasions with the inspection teams when the Iraqi experts had the chance to sit together with the members of those teams and conducted with them scientific professional discussions in a constructive atmosphere. The Iraqi experts responded to thousands of questions put to them and provided the teams with thousands of documents of information and data requested by the teams. The most recent of such discussions were those held with the 2 members of the Special Commission in late January 1992, which were also most fruitful and positive. Amongst the 29 inspection teams that have so far visited Iraq, 24 heads of such teams have issued fair and objective statements pointing to the good cooperation extended by the Iraqi authorities and to the positive result achieved. I wish, in this respect, to refer to the positive statement recently made by Moises Ferrero of the 10th Nuclear Inspection Team, in which he stressed and praised the cooperation of the Iraqi side with the inspection teams. So why don't we adopt this objective and constructive approach? And why do we keep seeing a provocation, an accusation resorted to? The reason is clearly political, completely ill-intended, and has nothing real to do with the process of fulfilling the provisions of Resolution 687.
Mr. President, we have come to this meeting in good faith and with a true desire to make the facts clear, reach an understanding with the Council on the matters relevant to implementing Resolution 687, clarify the matters about which doubts and allegations are raised, and to address the issues that need to be solved. Our delegation is hereby ready to clarify to the distinguished council all relevant points which they wish to know about. I also wish to make the following observations on a number of issues raised particularly in the presidential statement recently issued by the Council on the 28th of February 1992. 1. Iraq is ready to continue cooperating with the Special Commission and the IAEA in order to accomplish the tasks stipulated in Resolution 687. Second, having submitted huge amounts of data, information, and documents and answered thousands of questions put by inspection teams, Iraq is ready to continue cooperating in this respect in order to complete the picture in accordance with the goals of Resolution 687. 3. Iraq is ready to reach a practical solution to the question of the Security Council verification of Iraq's capabilities to produce the weapons prohibited by Resolution 687. 4. Iraq is ready to reach a practical mechanism regarding the issue of the equipment covered by the provisions of paragraph 8 of Resolution 687 with a view to rendering these equipment harmless. Iraq is willing to do this on the basis of respect for its sovereignty and dignity and of non-infringement upon its national security, and on this basis not allowing the objectives stipulated in Resolution 687 to be turned into means of preventing our people and country from living its free normal life like all the other free peoples in the world. Mr. President, on the question of completing the information and data about which doubts and allegations continue to be raised, our delegation proposes that a technical meeting be held at the earliest time convenient to the Council between Iraqi representatives and representatives from the Special Commission and attended by representatives from all member states of the Security Council. The Special Commission will submit at this meeting all its demands for data and information and put all questions connected with Resolution 687. During this meeting, a comprehensive review will be made of all data, information and documentation presented by Iraq at the request of the Special Commission. Following this, a comprehensive report on the situation will be presented to the Council with a specific period of time in order that we may bring this issue out of the cycle of allegations, frictions, misunderstandings, and ill-intended political positions and place it in its right objective framework so the Council can see the facts as they actually are. Through this, the Council's demand for a full, complete and final declaration of the programs in question will have been accomplished in a scientific, objective and reliable manner. I would like to inform you and the distinguished members of the Council that we are ready to embark as of this day on this operation if the Special Commission and the IAEA are ready to do so. Regarding the operations of verifying Iraq's capabilities to produce prohibited weapons in the future, we have reaffirmed our willingness to cooperate while underlying the necessity of respect for considerations of Iraqi sovereignty and national security. Practical arrangements should be reached within the framework of the objective identified by the Security Council. Such arrangements should not go beyond this framework to achieve political and intelligence purposes. The Special Commission has, for instance, chose to use U-2 aircraft to conduct flights over Iraqi territory. This aircraft belongs to the United States of America, whose administration has been announcing on a daily basis its intention to strike at and destroy the political leadership of Iraq. Are we to accept that this aircraft is used solely for the task of the Special Commission, or is it being used for intelligence purposes? We have a right here to raise doubts and apprehensions, for how can we interpret the fact that we have seen this aircraft conduct around 15 flights over Baghdad alone, each flight lasting 3 to 4 hours? And this operation was repeated several times within 1 month earlier this year. Why is it that we failed to choose another aircraft from an impartial state to operate from an Iraqi airfield with an Iraqi pilot accompanying its crew, in order that we may be satisfied that the operation will be to accomplish the objectives of Resolution 687 and not political or intelligence objectives threatening Iraq's security? How long will these extraordinary measures continue for? Doesn't the basic principle of respect for Iraq's sovereignty and security call for a reasonable period be determined for these suspect reconnaissance operations to be brought to an end? It is imperative, therefore, that this subject be discussed in a serious and fair manner. As in order to determine the issue of ongoing monitoring in a final and constructive manner, we propose that a common discussion be conducted of the plans related thereto. The inspection teams have evinced understanding of this view when we proposed it to them during their visits to Iraq. As regards the equipment which can be modified to non-prohibited use in accordance with Resolution 687, we must ask, what is the real objective sought in paragraph 8 of Resolution 687? Is it to prevent Iraq from becoming an industrialized country and to destroy all its industries and all the advanced industrial property in its possession? Or is the objective to verify the non-production of weapons prohibited under Resolution 687? If the first is the objective, can any people accept a situation in which it is deprived of its advanced industrial base and pushed back to the pre-industrial age, which was the threat I received from the U.S. Secretary of State during our meeting in Geneva on the 9th of January 1991? The people of Iraq will never accept that. But if the objective of the Council is to verify the non-use of those equipment in producing prohibited weapons on the basis of Resolution 687, then we are ready to cooperate in this regard. The current resolutions and plans, with their general language, are capable of being used in this or that direction. What we ask is for the language to be carefully selected in the light of the objective set, and for the methods of implementation and conduct to be determined for the Special Commission and the IAEA to follow, again in the light of the objective set. It is possible to reach a reasonable formula by which the objective can be achieved while preserving at the same time Iraq's legitimate rights and its sovereignty and security. On this question, we wish to make certain points. There is an extremist approach in interpreting item B of paragraph 9 of Resolution 687, which determines the mechanism of implementing paragraph 8. This approach calls only for destruction, whereas the original paragraph allows such equipment to be rendered harmless. The overwhelming part of the equipment and machines in question are for general use and can only be turned to special use by attaching dies, tools, and fixtures. This fact is basic knowledge to everyone involved in the field of industry. Why is it not enough to destroy these accessories and thus guarantee that machines and equipment are not turned to prohibited use? Why this insistence on the total destruction of these machines and equipment? How, for instance, can we understand the insistence on total destruction of a computer system simply because it has been used to calculate the performance of the rocket motor, when it will be sufficient to erase the program from the computer disk or even destroy the disk itself? How can we interpret the destruction of ordinary cooling equipment which had been used to cool the chamber housing the rocket motor? How can we interpret the demand that buildings should be destroyed simply because they housed machines which were to be used in producing the bodies for the rocket motors? How can we understand the demand for the destruction of equipment that can be used in the product of tooth fillings and bone replacement and of testing equipment for communication and electricity network systems? Mr. President, in order to solve all these matters, our delegation proposes that the Special Commission prepare a complete and final list of all the machines and equipment concerned, which the Commission proposes for destruction or for being rendered harmless. The Special Commission can do this without difficulty because it has already inventoried all the machines and equipment relating to Resolution 687. The list is to be submitted to the Security Council with representatives from Iraq attending to convey our view on whether it is or is not possible to use the equipment for prohibited purposes. If it is thought that the Council in its present form cannot carry out this task, then every member state could be represented by specialized experts capable of verifying the data and information submitted by both the Special Commission and the Iraqi representatives. Thus, it will be possible to come to a decision based on objective grounds and related to the goal identified in Resolution 687. In this way, the goal can be achieved away from suspicion, allegations, and the atmosphere of tension, and away from ill-intended political objectives. The Security Council has entrusted to the Special Commission certain tasks, but these tasks should remain technical in nature, and the Council should not relinquish its authority in taking the final decision on matters of a political and legal nature relating to the destiny of a free people and of the fate of such properties as this people cherishes and finds of use to helping it move towards regaining its prosperity. Keeping matters vague and unresolved, preserving to the Special Commission alone the absolute power of issuing decisions, means that the fate of properties belonging to the people of Iraq, indeed the very destiny, sovereignty, and security of this people, shall remain indefinitely in the hands of a body which does not exist in the UN Charter, without allowing Iraq to have any say on the matter. Is this the objective which the Security Council set for itself by adopting its resolutions? I would like to add here, Mr. President, that the understanding by the Council of the principles and the legitimate and logical demands we have submitted naturally leads to a fair, equitable, and objective implementation of those essential requirements sought from Iraq in resolutions 687, 707, and 715, and which would reassure the Council. I will now read this paragraph in English.
To the logical and legitimate principles, basis, and requests which we have presented will naturally lead to an objective, equitable, and just implementation of the substantive obligations placed upon Iraq in Resolution 707 and 715 in a manner which will satisfy the Council.
Finally, Mr. President, what is the position of the Security Council on the subject of the economic embargo? In spite of all that has been fulfilled in the context of implementing the provisions of Resolution 687, the Council has not budged an inch its position on the question of the embargo, nor has the Council taken into consideration adherence to the UN Charter and international law in respect of the rights of civilian population. 13 months have now gone by since we had the ceasefire and Resolution 660, on the basis of which the economic embargo was imposed, and the people of Iraq remain deprived of their right to normal life and importing all their humanitarian needs. In theory, Iraq has been allowed to import medicines and foodstuffs, but Iraqi assets in other countries continue to be frozen, despite the fact that the Security Council has decided to authorize the countries concerned to take their own decisions to unfreeze the assets in question. Most countries have failed to take such decisions, particularly the Council member states. Iraq is not allowed, on the other hand, to export any commodity or goods whatsoever in order that it may use the revenues made through such exports to purchase food, medicines, and other humanitarian needs. Iraq is a country which has made an outstanding contribution to the establishment of human civilization. The museums of London, Paris, Berlin, and New York are full of treasures highlighting the greatness of Iraqi civilization. It was from amongst the people of Iraq that Abraham, the father of all prophets, emerged to the world. And it was this people that invented writing and established the world's first legal code determining the rights and obligations of man. This people is subjected today to such injustice and such iniquity. How long will this ancient nation endure this situation? And how long indeed will humanity bear it to let it go for? This people, Mr. President, distinguished members, is prohibited from importing the chlorine it needs to sterilize its drinking water, and now demands are made that the factory producing chlorine be destroyed. Iraq is further prevented from importing or producing the materials it needs to combat such plant diseases as may claim a major share of its agricultural produce under the pretext that these are chemical materials which can be used in weapons production. Indeed, the Sanctions Committee has gone so far as to prevent Iraq from importing even soap and detergents. The people of Iraq, which has given the world throughout a history of 6,000 years philosophers, poets, and men of letters, and which established the world's earliest university, is being prevented today from importing all of its needs of educational materials and of the paper needed to print school textbook and student notebooks. Here, allow me at this point to reiterate a fact underscored by Prince Saduddin Aga Khan, the former executive delegate of the Secretary General, at a press conference held here in the United Nations building on the 22nd of July 1991. Having visited Baghdad from the 29th of June to the 13th of July 1991, he said, in response to a question, that it would be difficult to deny the fact that the Iraqi people was being punished through the economic sanctions, while this had not been the objective sought by the resolutions of the Security Council. End of quote. The question constantly asked by 18 million Iraqis, together with millions more of honest free people in the world, is: for how long will this iniquitous siege continue to be imposed upon Iraq? And for how long will the Sanctions Committee continue to hold the absolute and arbitrary powers to determine the needs of the Iraqi people? How can the right of veto given to 5 member states since the founding of the United Nations organization be interpreted in such a way as to be used in determining whether a people should be allowed to purchase soap, printing paper, or children's toys? You, gentlemen, ask Iraq to implement and comply with that, and Iraq has been fulfilling its obligations month after month, we have submitted to you a comprehensive, factual report of what has been fulfilled and expressed our willingness to cooperate on sound bases emanating from the UN Charter and from the principles of justice and fairness. What obligations has the Council for its part fulfilled towards the people of Iraq? The answer is nothing whatsoever. Even when the Council adopted a resolution formally and theoretically allowing Iraq to export limited quantities of oil in order to be able to pay for food and medical purchases, the Council included both in the resolution itself and in the implementation plan an endless list of preconditions, all of which infringe upon Iraq's sovereignty and security, preconditions which constitute flagrant interference in Iraq's internal affairs and which stem from ill-intended political objectives. The Council imposed further preconditions which practically prevent Iraq from securing its people's needs of food and medicine. We call upon the Security Council to abandon this position for an objective and fair one. We have demonstrated in good faith our readiness to cooperate. The Security Council ought, for its part, to show willingness to fulfill its obligations towards the people of Iraq and proceed from good faith in dealing with Iraq. Mr. President, I had prepared this statement before attending this meeting. At this meeting, I have heard an important report which you have made. I also heard the distinguished members of the Council. I wish to make clear and accurate comments which are totally unambiguous on the points raised by you in your report and which still are the subject of doubts or incomplete information. I would also like to comment on some of the concerns expressed by a number of the distinguished members. I leave it to your discretion as to the time which you can set for me to make these remarks. And if you were kind enough to ask about the time that I find convenient for me, I hope that this be in a meeting tomorrow. This is a mere request, but the decision is up to the distinguished President. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the distinguished Vice Prime Minister of Iraq for his statement, and with regard to his statement, his request rather, I will be pleased to deal with that. I was envisaged to suspend the meeting now until 4:30 this afternoon, and in accordance with Council Regulation 37, Mr. Hans Blix and Ambassador Ekeus will be taking the floor. Subsequently, others on the list and the distinguished Vice Prime Minister will have an opportunity then to intervene either at the end or tomorrow morning, depending on the further evolution of discussion of aspects to be dealt with at this meeting. If that seems appropriate to you, that is the way we'll be proceeding at this afternoon's meeting. I intend at this point to suspend the meeting. Prior to suspending it, however, I invite the members to a informal consultation meeting at 4:30, after which this particular council meeting will resume. This meeting stands suspended.